Chen Ping'an was a bit annoyed with himself, and he thought that he shouldn't have been so whimsical with his actions. An impulsive thought had occurred to him back then, leading him to go on this aimless trip 150 kilometers down the river. In the end, he had drawn the attention of those water ghosts and water demons, and was now being coveted by them. What would he have done if a battle had broken out? His sword-nurturing gourd was still with his physical body, and his movements had been extremely stiff when he had practiced the six-step walking meditation above the river just then. His punches had been soft and powerless. In fact, it seemed like his soul was innately poor at martial arts and fist techniques. Right now, Chen Ping'an felt a sense of lingering fear as he thought about that pair of lantern-sized silver eyes at the bottom of the river. Seemingly reading Chen Ping'an's thoughts, Zhong Kuei explained, souls like to travel through heaven and earth at night, yet your soul has insisted on coming to Burial River's water god temple during its first trip out of your physical body. According to the explanations of Qi refiners, this might indicate that there exists an exceptional fated opportunity in this place. However, you still have to be careful. When it comes to fated opportunities, it's difficult to say whether you'll enjoy fortune or suffer misfortune. Fated opportunities aren't always good things. Is the temple attendant in the water god temple a cultivator? Will they be able to see my soul? Chen Ping'an asked. Zhong Kuei huffed and replied, with how hot-tempered the water goddess of Burial River is, she'll charge over to fight with that water demon every so often. Moreover, there are so many wrong souls and malicious ghosts in the river, and all of them are controlled by that water demon. That being the case, do you think there'll be no powerful cultivator watching over the water god temple where her gold statue is placed? If that were the case, then the water demon that refers to itself as Immortal Lord Huang would have swallowed the temple along with the small mountain a long time ago. Chen Ping'an blushed with shame and said, that does seem to make sense. Zhong Kuei finally revealed a piece of good news, saying, however, you don't need to worry. Your soul is very indistinct, so the cultivators in the water god temple won't notice you unless you enter the temple to offer incense. Zhong Kuei frowned and swam in a circle around Chen Ping'an before continuing. Tisk tsk Chen Ping'an, have you suffered two great calamities before? One calamity was extremely early on in your life, and it affected your destiny and damaged your fortune. One calamity was a few years ago, and it severed your bridge of immortality. Am I correct? This was because Zhong Kuei was a noble scholar from Great Subduing Academy. More importantly, Zhong Kuei had mentioned Mr. Qi before. Zhong Kuei rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. How did you figure this out? Chen Ping'an asked. Zhong Kuei was still looking Chen Ping'an up and down as he slowly replied. Trees have rings that reveal their age, and human souls are actually quite similar. It's just that the human body is a small world while the world is a big human body. The human skin, blood, flesh, tendons, and bones are like a wall between the two entities. Seeing the baffled expression on Chen Ping'an's face, Zhong Kuei gave an example saying, take for instance majestic world and heavenly world. If a cultivator wants to observe a fellow cultivator from the other world, it will be impossible even if they can observe mountains and rivers through their palms and even if they're at the 12th tier. After a person manifests their soul, however, their soul will become much clearer and much easier to see. At that time, many more clues can be identified. Zhong Kuei suddenly chuckled and remarked, Chen Ping'an, you've been working quite hard to patch everything up. Chen Ping'an's bonded porcelain had shattered, preventing him from obtaining any fated opportunities in Jewel's small world. Afterward, his bridge of immortality had also been severed, causing his body to become like a dilapidated house that leaked wind and rain. It was because of this that he had been forced to practice the mountain-shaking fist to stay alive. Zhong Kuei was spot on in saying that Chen Ping'an had been working quite hard to patch everything up. In the past, there was virtuous scholar Zhou Ju from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, who could trap his opponents in astral winds and instantly reduce them to a rack of bones simply by reciting a poem. Now there was noble scholar Zhong Kuei from Parasol Leaf Continent who was even more powerful and profound. This caused Chen Ping'an to develop deeper and more complicated feelings toward the Confucian academies. Are you going to enter the temple to offer incense? Is it really okay for a noble scholar from a Confucian academy to do this? Chen Ping'an asked. Zhong Kuei couldn't help but chuckle. If some of the more pedantic scholars in the academy learn about this, there might indeed be some criticism. It won't be anything major though. Scholars aren't as stubborn as you think. A teasing smile suddenly appeared his face and he remarked, "Huh? So that's how it's going to be. Thanks to you, I'll also be able to experience the short temper of Burial River's water goddess." Zhong Kuei's lips moved slightly, causing the river current to flow around them as if they were pillar rocks in the river. At the same time, a faint glow appeared around them, appearing like a large umbrella that shrouded them and concealed their presence. The noble scholar then grabbed Chen Ping'an's arm and said, "Come on, let's go and enjoy a show together." Burial River became incredibly murky and tumultuous, as if a burst of thunder were rumbling through the river. At the bottom of a section of the river 2 to 3 kilometers away from the water god temple, the surroundings had already become a battlefield. Chen Ping'an looked over from the distance and saw a petite woman dressed in black holding some sort of item and swinging it around. Each time she swung it, a spectacular silver arc would slide through the water. However, she was swinging far too quickly, causing the silver arcs to stack and accumulate. In the end, the silver light appeared like a chaotic sheet of cursive script that was written in an extremely free and bold manner. The figure in the distance was radiating with a faint golden light, making her appear like a bright light in the pitch-black depths of the river. She was as eye-catching as could be. The woman was very short, and this caused her to appear quite dainty and cute. She also looked fairly young, though her appearance was ordinary and unremarkable. In fact, she had a bit of a baby face due to how round her face was. However, the pure golden glow around her and the intense look in her eyes made her appear very mighty and imposing. There was a saber by her waist, a sword on her back, and even an iron spear in her hand. The spear was extremely long, so long that it almost doubled her in height. Her saber scabbard was azure and purple, and more than half of it was wrapped in golden thread. 5 colored iridescent clouds were rising from the connection between her sword scabbard and sword hilt, and the magnificence of this scene led one to believe that the sword in the scabbard was definitely an extraordinary weapon. The water goddess was like a gust of wind as she dashed back and forth in the water, experiencing no resistance at all. She was as swift as lightning, and the long spear in her hand slashed through the water demon's colossal body several times, causing clouds of blood to bloom into the surroundings. A bloody smell filled this section of Burial River. One time, the water goddess was struck by the water demon's head and smashed into the bottom of the river, sending a loud rumble through the surroundings. However, she immediately charged back up and thrust her spear through the colossal water demon's chin, causing its deafening wail of anguish to ring through the river. The water demon furiously thrashed around, sending huge waves across the surface of Burial River. In fact, even the common people living near the water god temple noticed this abnormal scene. However, no one was afraid, and they instead stood on their tippy toes and peered into the distance, treating this as an interesting matter. The short woman was more than just aggressive and swift with her attacks. She also liked to curse her opponent as she fought. "Evil beast, are you trying to rebel against the heavens? You should be thanking the fortune of your ancestors that I didn't charge over to attack you. Forget about it. You're a vile beast that doesn't have ancestors, aren't you? Since you dared to approach my temple, let me collect a few 100 kilograms of meat from you this time. Don't think that I'm afraid of you just because you have allies in the imperial court, and you sent 800,000 taels of silver to Mirage City every year. You've been trying to strip me of my title as commandery governor this entire time. But what does it matter? Even my temple becomes an illegal temple in the Great Quan Empire. What does it matter even if I sacrifice my gold statue? If I say that I'll hack you into 18 pieces, I definitely won't hack you into just 17 pieces. Come on, vile beast. Come here and eat another attack from my spear. When our battle is over, I'm going to ask my kitchen to make a bowl of stir-fried eel noodles. It's incredibly delicious." The water demon was colossal and golden, yet its body was naked and without any scales. This strange contrast was repulsive and vomit-inducing. This water demon had once lived in a renowned lake in the Great Quan Empire. All beings in the world could become spirits after living for long enough, and it was just that their cultivation speed would be very slow. Though the water demon had obtained a huge fated opportunity a long time ago, and reached the threshold of the Dragon Gate tier after cultivating in earnest for 600 years, it was stuck at the threshold for a full 100 years. Afterward, thanks to some guidance from a mighty figure who was traveling across the lake, the water demon left its old home and climbed ashore. It experienced many obstacles and hardships, and it started to walk downstream from the start of Burial River, emulating the act of flood dragons crossing rivers. This had allowed the water demon to break through the barrier and advance to the Dragon Gate tier. If the water demon had been allowed to continue walking down the river without obstruction, eventually arriving at the intersection between the river and the Great River and finally entering the sea, it could have perhaps formed a golden core and advanced to the golden core tier. Unexpectedly, however, things took a turn for the worse when he passed Burial River's water god temple. That damned woman actually became angry at him for killing some mortal humans, and she claimed that she was going to carry out justice for the heavens. In fact, she even went as far as to fight with her life on the line. The water demon had just advanced to the Dragon Gate tier at that time, so it was extremely confident and didn't pay too much heed to the water goddess. There was also a water god in its old home, the renowned lake in the Great Quan Empire, yet this water god was nothing more than a subservient underling for it. The water god would kneel and bow in its presence, and would even offer it tributes every year. Starting from the section of Burial River outside the water god temple, the two of them continued to fight and travel upstream, unleashing such intensity that the river water spilled more than 150 kilometers past each shore. Fortunately, those were deserted banks of the river with no inhabitants. It was thanks to this that the mortals weren't affected. Surprisingly, the water demon was weaker than the water goddess while fighting underwater, so it was eventually left with no option but to return upstream and recuperate for several dozen years. After stabilizing its cultivation, it had gained the ability to assume human form. Thus, it had transformed into a burly man and walked ashore with many precious treasures. It personally visited the green roving residence to apologize and seek forgiveness, yet that damned brain-dead woman surprisingly attacked him without so much as saying a single word. The water demon also flared up in violent rage at that time, and both sides unleashed all of their immortal treasures. The battle was even more violent and ruthless than the first time, and half of the water goddess' green roving residence was obliterated. Cracks also appeared on her gold statue located in the water god temple. The water demon didn't fare any better. One of his bonded immortal treasures was damaged, and one of his water-subduing treasures was destroyed. It retreated after suffering a heavy defeat. For the next 200 years, it viewed the battle at Green Roving Residence as an utter humiliation. Even though its cultivation base rose explosively after careful planning and earnest cultivation, allowing it to approach the threshold to the Golden Core tier, it still refused to assume human form for a second time. The water demon vowed that it would only assume human form and swagger onto shore once it shattered that crazy woman's gold statue and rendered her water god temple completely useless. As for the shards of her gold statue, those would naturally become a hearty meal for the water demon. After devouring them, it could perhaps advance to the Golden Core tier without even needing to travel to the sea. However, the water demon was genuinely no match for Burial River's water goddess when it fought with her underwater. It never enjoyed an advantage against her, not even once. After fighting for more than 200 years, it was quite clear that the damned woman was hellbent on stopping it from traveling any further downstream. Because of this foolish decision that harmed the two of them and benefited no one, the water goddess was also making little progress in refining her gold statue even though she was enjoying so many incense offerings from the mortal world. Tonight, the water demon unsurprisingly suffered another defeat. It rapidly retreated upstream. The short woman only scowled in anger and stopped her attacks once she understood that the water demon would rush ashore to kill innocent mortals if she continued to pursue it. Her iron spear had sunk to the bottom of the river at some time during their intense battle, so she sheathed her saber and sword before diving down to retrieve her favorite weapon. She cursed under her breath and returned to Green Roving Residence in a flash. Only then did Zhong Kuei appear with Chen Ping'an. The two of them swam ashore and walked to the water god temple. To Chen Ping'an's surprise, there were close to 1,000 people standing outside the temple, waiting for it to open so that they could go inside to offer incense. The bottom of the mountain was clogged with carriages and hinnies, while the area outside the temple was bustling with many snack stalls. Add to that the peculiar phenomenon that had taken place upstream of Burial River just then, and everyone was as lively and excited as could be. Zhong Kuei accompanied Chen Ping'an as he walked over to look at those white jade tablets, each of which looked like a bamboo shoot rising up through the soil after spring rain. Most of the white jade tablets contained prayers for rain, and these were largely erected by past emperors of the Great Quan Empire as well as the local officials. Some jade tablets also contained imperial edicts in which the emperors admitted mistakes and reproached themselves. Of course, there were also jade tablets erected after successfully praying for and receiving rain, thanking the water god for bestowing rain upon the land. Chen Ping'an skimmed over these few types of jade tablets very quickly. Zhong Kuei had already walked to the very front of the forest jade tablets, and was squatting on the ground and looking at an ancient and severely weathered stone tablet. Only a few dozen words were still legible, and much of the original contents had already been lost. Chen Ping'an walked and stood beside Zhong Kuei. He discovered that the contents of the stone tablet was a poem, yet there was no signature to indicate who had composed this work. Perhaps due to its ancient age and punishment from the elements, only half of the characters still remained on the stone tablet. Heaven and earth are deaf, the sun and moon are blind. The mountains and rivers are haggard, the grass and trees are withered. The heavens are merry, the people lament their misfortune. Will be captured and sent to the netherworld. Manipulating the lightning lord, controlling thunder and lightning. Wind and clouds doth rapidly flow and transform in the sky. Wields a divine weapon, a drop of water from a golden bottle, weaving through the sky like fabric being made. The scorching heat is swept away. Can you decipher anything? Zhong Kuei asked. I only recognize the characters, Chen Ping'an replied with a shake of his head. Master once said that the poem recorded on this stone tablet is actually a long-lost Taoist cultivation mantra. Zhong Kuei revealed with emotion. Then can you decipher anything? Chen Ping'an asked. I only recognize the characters, Zhong Kuei replied in a serious manner. Chen Ping'an chuckled in response. The two of them stood up, and they saw that the front of the rain god temple was still overflowing with people. Thanks to you, I might not be able to offer the first stick of incense anymore.
Zhong Kuei grumbled.
However, a sense of helplessness quickly crept into Zhong Kuei's voice as he continued. Officials and wealthy nobles are definitely waiting at the back door already. That small door will open 15 to 30 minutes earlier than the main entrance. In other words, the common people can wait here for days and years if they want, but they'll never be able to offer the first stick of incense unless they go around to the back and convince the temple attendant to personally open the back door for them. Chen Ping'an hesitated for a moment before saying, There's a Buddhist saying in my hometown that goes, refrain from looking outward. 2. This saying is excellent, Zhong Kuei remarked with a nod. Buddhists talk about proper faith, and this means to faithfully believe in the proper dharma. Regarding the matter of offering the first stick of incense, many people in the world have actually misunderstood this concept. Offering the first stick of incense doesn't mean physically entering the temple first to place the first stick of incense in the censer. Rather, it's just like you said, refrain from looking outward. The first stick of incense refers to the first stick of incense offered by each sincere visitor. The first stick of incense in one's life, the first stick of incense in a year, the first stick of incense in a month, all of these can be regarded as the first stick of incense. This makes sense, Chen Ping'an said with a nod. Do you think it's easy to become a noble scholar in a Confucian academy? Zhong Kuei asked with a chuckle. It requires very profound knowledge. Then why don't you compose a poem for me? Chen Ping'an challenged. The topic can be your thoughts after reading the inscriptions on the rain-praying tablet. Literati often talk about composing poems in their travel journals, so why don't you give it a go as well? Zhong Kuei gazed up at the moon and replied, Tonight is suitable for climbing mountains and entering rivers, it's suitable for visiting the residences of others, and it's also suitable for visiting deities. However, tonight is not suitable for composing poems. Chen Ping'an replied with a cold chuckle. Chen Ping'an, you're being quite insincere now. Zhong Kuei huffed, with his embarrassment turning into mock anger. He then chuckled and asked, Do you want to accompany me to Green Roving Residence? It's going to become a water god palace in the future, and this is an extremely rare case. Few such palaces exist in Parasol Leaf Continent, and I can count all of them on my fingers. If you're lucky, you might even be able to see Burial River's water goddess. Didn't we see her just then? Chen Ping'an asked. Zhong Kuei slapped his forehead in response. However, this slap also caused a flash of realization to hit him, and he exclaimed, The fated opportunity. Now that your own soul is wandering around at night, perhaps your fated opportunity rests in green roving residence, and rests with the water goddess. Chen Ping'an shook his head and said, "Forget about it. I need to hurry back to my physical body." Zhong Kuei's expression was as if he had seen a ghost. There existed someone in the world who was this nonchalant toward fated opportunities? 1. This poem is Praying for Rain, written by Bai Yuchan, a Taoist and alchemist from the Southern Song dynasty. The full poem reads, "Heaven and earth are deaf, the sun and moon are blind. No rain falls, severe droughts are aplenty. The mountains and rivers are haggard, the grass and trees are withered. The heavens are merry, the people lament their misfortune. Wait for me to ride an immortal crane east. I'll wake the dragon with a roar. I'll split the heavens with an axe. The arrogant sun god under the Kuei star will be captured and sent to the netherworld. Manipulating the lightning lord, controlling thunder and lightning. Wind and clouds doth rapidly flow and transform in the sky. The fiery warrior wields a divine weapon, a drop of water from a golden bottle, weaving through the sky like fabric being made." Suddenly, they heard a loud commotion at the foot of the mountain. Zhong Kuei grabbed Chen Ping'an and said, "Trouble has come knocking, let's go and take a look." The temple attendant of the water god temple was an old woman, and she was standing at the foot of the mountain with a transcendent-looking old cultivator who resided in the temple. They were currently blocking a woman in white from ascending the mountain. In the distance, the people crowding around the snack stalls pointed at them and engaged in spirited discussions. The woman in white appeared entirely ordinary from a distance, but a closer look revealed that she was practically a bamboo basket full of water. Her face was sickly and pale, and her white dress was drenched in water. Water was seeping out of her skin and dripping onto the ground, leaving a clear trail behind her. The old woman thumped her dragon-head cane into the ground and said with a cold smile, "A measly water ghost dares to violate the water goddess's temple? You're seeking death." The old cultivator smiled and corrected her. "She's already an evil spirit from the river, so it seems a little inappropriate to say that she's seeking death." There was a cold and menacing smile on the old woman's face as she glowered at the impudent water ghost from Burial River. This water ghost was only a small fry, and the old woman could easily destroy her with a single whack from her cane. In fact, killing this water ghost could even be considered an act of virtue. The female water ghost trembled in fear. However, she still bit her lips and summoned her courage, looking at the two high and mighty beings and saying in a timid voice, "Esteemed temple attendant, esteemed immortal, I've come here to look for a scholar. He said that he could help me break free from the control of the river demon, and that I wouldn't need to commit evil and harm people anymore." The old cultivator stroked his beard and chuckled. "Should I deal with her, or will you deal with her?" The old woman moved to raise her cane and smack the female water ghost to death. However, she suddenly discovered that she couldn't move her cane no matter what. She turned around in shock, only to see a smiling scholar. "Let's discuss things in a civilized manner, okay?" The scholar said. "This young lady isn't lying, and I indeed promised that I would help her. It's quite impressive that she summoned the courage to come ashore knowing that the water demon would ruthlessly torture her if she was caught. If I were a fraudster, then she might have suffered agonizing torture for the next 10 years or 100 years. In fact, she might have been reduced to one of those soul wicks at the bottom of Burial River. This kind of torture is more terrifying than any cruel punishment that exists in the mortal world." Zhong Kuei looked at the female ghost, the one whose hair he had grabbed before, and said with a smile, "You have remarkable courage and even more remarkable judgment, young lady. I'll help you escape your fate. Since you dared to come ashore, I'll even try to help you reincarnate into a better life." The old woman's face became beet red, yet she was still unable to lift her cane a single inch. This infuriated her and she scolded, "What utter nonsense are you spewing, little boy? Are you trying to shelter this subordinate of the river demon right under the nose of the water goddess?" There was a dark look on the old cultivator's face, and his tongue was laced with even more poison as he said, "This person appears to have ulterior motives. Perhaps he's trying to infiltrate the temple, so that he can help the river demon attack our water goddess from the inside." Zhong Kuei paid no heed to the temple attendant and the old cultivator, and his gaze remained firmly fixed on the eyes of the female water ghost. There was fear and resentment in her eyes, and also a hint of remorse toward the impoverished scholar standing in front of her. Zhong Kuei nodded and said with a smile, "Seeing the kindness in your heart, I've decided to make an exception and break the rules for you even if Master scolds me afterward. At the very least, those who stand in front of me will receive rewards for their virtuous deeds. I make no distinctions between humans and ghosts. Please wait for a moment, young lady." Zhong Kuei reached over and dragged his hand down, causing the dragon head cane that weighed a whopping 50 kilograms to directly sink into the ground, vanishing without a trace. Then he sent the old woman flying through the air with a solid slap, causing her to spin dozens of times in midair before crashing to the ground more than 30 meters away. With another slap, he sent the old cultivator flying into Burial River. Chan Ping'an smiled faintly and commented, "This was reasonable in the context of the situation, but you were still a little unreasonable." This was what Zhong Kuei had said to him back in the small inn. Zhong Kuei laughed heartily and remarked, "Ask my own conscience, right?" The smile disappeared from Zhong Kuei's face, replaced with a shameless expression as he said, "It's already sufficient to act within reason. I'm only a noble scholar, not a sage, so there's no need for me to strictly adhere to etiquette. This notion is far too profound." The female ghost from Burial River gaped at him in shock. She had guessed that the scholar in front of her was a powerful qi refiner, but she definitely hadn't imagined that he was powerful enough to send the temple attendant and the old cultivator flying with a single slap each. The two of them had been completely powerless in front of him. Zhong Kuei's aura suddenly changed as he strode forward and allowed his sleeves to billow in the air. He stood still in front of the female ghost and said in a solemn voice, "Tell me your name, hometown, and 8 characters of birth time." The female ghost obeyed Zhong Kuei's request and offered all of this information. Zhong Kuei nodded in response, signaling that he understood. He then held 2 fingers together and gently placed them against the female ghost's glabella, saying in a calm voice, "I, noble scholar Zhong Kuei from Great Subduing Academy." Chan Ping'an discovered that apart from Zhong Kuei, the female ghost, and him, everyone else near the water god temple had become completely frozen. Time had stopped flowing. "Hereby make this declaration to the netherworld," Zhong Kuei continued in a slow voice. "When traveling to the Yin world, no ghost shall violate this woman, and no underworld official shall humiliate this woman. All of her negative karma shall be erased and passed on to me to suffer. Allow her to reincarnate, and grant her great fortune." Chan Ping'an suddenly looked up, only to see dark clouds stretching for hundreds of meters above Burial River, blotting out the bright moon. The head of a mountain-sized entity vaguely appeared in the dark clouds. Its aura was astounding, and its appearance was identical to that of the highest-ranked errand ghosts illustrated in the picture scrolls of some immortal forces in the mountains. The sea of dark clouds became increasingly thick and heavy as it descended from the sky and spread across Burial River. The official from the Yin world slowly walked out from the sea of dark clouds, quickly coming to a stop after it arrived on shore. It lowered its head, atop which an official hat of the Yin world was sitting, and it cupped its fists and said, "As you command." As it raised its arms to cup its fists, a loud clanking sound revealed that there were actually 2 metal chains wrapped around its arms and hanging all the way to the ground. Zhong Kuei retracted his fingers. The soul of the female ghost started to dissipate like scattering fireflies, drifting toward the errand ghost standing on the riverbank. The female ghost sobbed and said, "Thank you, young Master Zhong. I hope I can repay this huge debt of gratitude in my next life." Zhong Kuei smiled and shook his hand, saying, "There's no need. It's best that you don't come across me again in the future. Just enjoy a peaceful life as the daughter of a wealthy clan." In the end, the female ghost was taken away by the errand ghosts from the Yin world. The dark clouds above Burial River and in the sky also receded and vanished in a flash. Before leaving, the errand ghost took a glance at Chan Ping'an. It was unclear whether this glance was intentional or not. Zhong Kuei wiped the sweat from his forehead and slowly exhaled. He then turned to Chan Ping'an and said, "Sure enough, your Yin soul is different. You weren't suppressed just now. Perhaps you've walked along the river of time before? This is surely impossible, right?" Chan Ping'an sidestepped Zhong Kuei's question, instead saying, "I feel like Zhou Nyang will probably take a liking to you." Zhong Kuei's eyes lit up and he exclaimed, "You really think so?" "I was only being polite. Don't take it too seriously," Chan Ping'an replied with a faint smile. Zhong Kuei couldn't help but smile bitterly. I genuinely succeeded in performing this transaction that's against the rules? He murmured to himself. He suddenly cocked his head and stroked his chin, clicking his tongue in wonder and declaring, "I'm so impressive. It's rare to come across a man as handsome and capable as me." Chan Ping'an nodded and concurred. "You can even write doggerel and work as an accountant." Zhong Kuei sighed in grief and lamented, "Chatting with you is so tiring." Green Roving Residence wasn't constructed next to Burial River, but instead located in a mountain valley more than 5 kilometers away. There were no mountain paths near this section of the river, and this resulted in the mountains being desolate and sparsely populated. As a result, it was very difficult for the local officials to visit Green Roving Residence. Fortunately, the water goddess was an elusive deity who rarely showed herself and seldom granted an audience with other people. This saved the officials a lot of difficult travel and hard work. Otherwise, the provincial officials and the prefectural officials would need to visit the mountain god residences and the water god residences once every year. This was already a custom. Yin Miaofeng and Xiao Yuanran, the master and disciple from Golden Summit Taoist Temple, were both cultivators, so they naturally didn't find it difficult to traverse the mountains to visit Green Roving Residence. Upon arriving, Yin Miaofeng loudly announced his title, revealing both his position as a guest elder of the Great Quan Empire and his status as a member of Golden Summit Taoist Temple. He had no option but to do this. Burial River's water goddess had a strange temper, and all of the cultivators in the Great Quan Empire had heard about this before. Yin Miaofeng was afraid that Green Roving Residence would refuse to open its door and let them in if he didn't reveal his affiliation with Golden Summit Taoist Temple. However, Taoist preserving innocence Yin Miaofeng was still mistaken. The front gate of Green Roving Residence remained tightly shut even after he revealed his affiliation with Golden Summit Taoist Temple and its abbot. Not even a single servant walked out to greet them. Yin Miaofeng was furious, yet had no option but to suppress his anger. He once again announced his positions and kindly requested that the water goddess open the gate and grant them an audience. He also revealed that he was here with a secret edict from the emperor. Xiao Yuanran became increasingly curious. What was this important matter that his master needed to attend to? It was so important that his master was still trying even after being ignored and refused entrance? In a brightly lit hall located inside the large residence that measured roughly 7 acres in area, there was a short woman sitting with a foot on the bench and slurping a bowl of noodles. More accurately, she was slurping a very large pot of noodles, more than 2 times the size of her head. This was naturally stir-fried eel noodles. Many stewards and maidservants stood around the large hall, and all of them were water ghosts who had died unjust deaths in Burial River. "Milady, you're really not going to grant an audience to those 2 Taoist priests from Golden Summit Taoist Temple?" one of the old stewards asked. The water goddess didn't so much as raise her head, and her chopsticks continued to move around in a blur as she loudly slurped her noodles. Her voice was muffled as she replied, "I won't grant them shit. They repeat the same rhetoric over and over again, and it's so bloody annoying." She suddenly looked up at an honest-looking chef who was just in the process of removing his oversleeves, and she praised, "The noodles are cooked quite well. However, remember to add a little more chili next time. You should add 3 or 4 ounces. That will make the noodles even more delicious. Oh, and also keep in mind that it's best to use Facing Heaven pepper from Mr. Liu's store. His peppers have the most authentic taste." The chef appeared to be a stutterer, and he nodded and replied, "Me, lady, I understand." The short woman rolled her eyes and huffed, "Lady, your bloody mom. I'm still a young maiden." Her heart suddenly jolted, and she slapped her chopsticks to the table before quickly standing up with strong killing intent on her face. "Bloody hell, someone actually dares to cause trouble at my temple. Are they itching for a beating?" A wisp of smoke appeared on the table, rising like curling incense smoke. Along with it, there was also the voice of an old woman. The water goddess listened intently, and still filled with killing intent, she burped in satisfaction before hurriedly bending down to eat another large mouthful of stir-fried eel noodles. Only then did she wipe her mouth and stride outside. Before arriving at the door, she turned to the old steward and said, "I need to go to the temple for a while, so you can go to the front door and see the 2 guests off. Just repeat the same thing to them again." Green roving residence will insist on keeping its old plaque up unless the imperial court can ask the Confucian Academy to give me that sagely book. A glum expression appeared on the old steward's face. Even though he respected the water goddess, he didn't necessarily fear her, so he directly asked, "Milady, what if the two Taoist immortals become angry and pummel me until my soul is destroyed? What should I do then? Who will travel to the mortal marketplaces to purchase goods for Milady in the future? If you're afraid of death, then just spit it out. Stop trying to find excuses for yourself." The water goddess spat. Even though she said this, her voice still reverberated around the area outside Green roving residence as she strode out and vanished in a flash. Discuss things in a civilized manner, and don't even think about killing any people. No, don't even think about killing any ghosts. A short woman suddenly materialized in the water god temple with a saber by her waist and a sword on her back. She didn't bring her long iron spear. From there, she strode forward and arrived before the two culprits in a flash. "What are the two of you playing at? Why are you causing trouble here?" The governor was the one who forcefully gave that old woman the position of temple attendant. "I can't even believe half of what she's saying. Even so, you make quite the ruckus here. Why don't you explain the situation to me? I'm all ears." The water goddess stealthily retreated as she spoke to Chan Ping'an and Zhong Kuei. She was afraid of them, but rather that she felt like she would lose a lot of face if she needed to crane her neck and gaze up at them as they spoke. She finally stopped when she retreated to a distance where she didn't need to crane her neck anymore. She suddenly recalled something and she added, "Oh, that's right, I'm Burial River's water goddess." Zhong Kuei explained the situation in a simple and concise manner, allowing everything to become very clear. After hearing Zhong Kuei's explanation, the water goddess nodded lightly and said, "That sounds about right. You two can feel free to wander around the temple. I'll tell that old temple attendant to pipe down and stick to her proper duties. She won't trouble the two of you anymore." Upon seeing that the water goddess was truly about to turn around and leave, Zhong Kuei hurriedly said, "I actually have some proper matters to discuss with you." The water goddess' expression became serious. She was the formal water goddess who ruled over Burial River, yet the peculiar commotion just then had been concealed as if some mountain mist had shrouded an area measuring more than 5 kilometers in radius. As a result, she had failed to observe the strange events that had taken place here. However, the water goddess was still well aware of the scholar's ability. He was definitely stronger than that troublesome river demon. Even though she was stronger in her temple than in the river, she was a young maiden after all, so she would naturally avoid fighting if she could. Since the scholar had explained everything clearly, she decided to treat this as nothing more than a chance encounter. The two parties could each go their own way. They could continue to pursue the Tao, while she returned to Green roving residence to enjoy her large pot of stir-fried eel noodles. Unexpectedly, however, the scholar was claiming that he had proper matters to discuss with her. Perhaps he was also here to discuss the promotion of her Green roving residence to the Green roving palace? "Are you from Great Subduing Academy?" she asked bluntly. Zhong Kuei smiled and replied, "You guessed correctly straight away, Miss Water Goddess. Sure enough." Stop right there. Don't try to get started with "sure enough." The water goddess raised a hand and cut Zhong Kuei off before he could start praising her, and she snapped, "Sure enough, scholars like you are all fond of flattering others." Chun Ping'an found this very interesting. Zhong Kuei scratched his head and asked, "Is it truly impossible for you to request an alternative Confucian classic? Do you know how troublesome it is for the emperor of the Great Quan Empire to deal with your stubbornness? Perhaps the noble scholar in Mirage City will become frustrated with your foolish stubbornness as well. It's not that Great Subduing Academy is unreasonable and haughty, and it's simply the case that your request is far too unreasonable." The water goddess nodded and replied, "I'm aware that my request is very unreasonable. That being the case, you people can simply reject my request. It's not like I care about Green roving residents being promoted to Green roving palace or anything. Oh, that's right, I hope that the Academy won't unleash its anger on the Imperial Court of the Great Quan Empire. If the Academy is truly angry, then they can come here and target me. I'll take responsibility for my own actions. This is the least Green roving residents can do." There was helplessness on Zhong Kuei's face as he remarked, "I genuinely can't understand this. Why do you insist on obtaining a Confucian classic written by that sage? Miss Water Goddess. Perhaps you're acquaintances with that sage. Burial River's water goddess shook her head in earnest and replied, I'm just a measly water goddess, so how can I possibly be acquainted with the scholarly sage who's even more knowledgeable than the heavens? I simply read one of his books before, and I felt like each character in his essays was a gem. His books are much better than those of the etiquette sage who expounds grand principles, yet are held back by his dull way of explaining things. It's also much better than that of the second sage, whose knowledge is slightly inferior to the etiquette sage. The paramount sage can somewhat be considered as equal to the second sage. Zhong Kuei blinked in puzzlement and exclaimed, Miss Water Goddess, are you truly uttering this in front of a noble scholar from a Confucian academy? Are you not afraid of being struck to death by lightning? Zhong Kuei hailed from the most orthodox lineage of the second sage, after all, and his esteemed master, the mountain master of Great Subduing Academy, was also someone who had graduated from that second sage residence in Middle-earth Divine Continent. Even though Zhong Kuei was angry, he wouldn't go so far as to harm the water goddess standing in front of him. However, his conscience would feel troubled if he didn't give her a good fright. The true reason behind his actions was naturally because Zhong Kuei was afraid of his master, who was guarding the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent, being alerted to the commotion here. If his master used a mystical ability to observe this area, yet he failed to step forward and speak up for his lineage, then wouldn't he be scolded to death by his master once he returned? Perhaps realizing that her careless remarks could well be regarded as blasphemy, the water goddess blinked and said, I still have a bowl of unfinished noodles at home, so I really need to get going now. The noodles won't taste good once they go cold. Chun Ping'an remained silent as he stood beside the noble scholar and the water goddess. However, all kinds of wonderful emotions were flying through his mind at this moment. The old woman, the temple attendant of the Burial River's water god temple, was a trusted subordinate of the local governor. Apart from receiving a reference from the governor, she had also spent a lot of her own money to build relationships with officials from the Ministry of Rights in Mirage City. It was thanks to these things that she had landed this incredibly lucrative job. Many Qi refiners were extremely jealous of her. The young noble scholar from Great Subduing Academy could kill her with a single wave of his hand. Why had the Great Quan Empire flourished for the past few decades? Why was it showing signs of becoming the alliance leader in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent? Apart from the wisdom and power of the emperor and the remarkable talents of the scholarly officials and military generals, there was actually another reason that everyone was well aware of. A noble scholar was staying in Mirage City. Meanwhile, neighboring countries like Northern Jian Nation and Southern Qi Nation didn't even have a virtuous scholar. Focusing back on the water god temple, the fact that Zhong Kuei was such a young noble scholar was already an immense deterrence in and of itself. There was a huge difference between someone in their 30s or 40s working extremely hard to become a champion scholar and a young prodigy becoming a champion scholar in their first attempt. Right now, the old woman and the old cultivator who had returned to shore were like little children waiting to be punished after they had done something wrong. They were old immortals in the eyes of mortal people, but their relationship with green roving residents was very ordinary. They were aware that the water goddess sincerely looked down on them from the bottom of her heart, and it was only because of the old woman's relationship with the governor and the imperial court that she turned a blind eye to them. The water goddess would leave them be as long as they didn't take things too far when trying to make money. However, tonight was going to be a little more painful because the water goddess and the water god temple were no longer on their side and protecting them. You were going to take advantage of your positions and power to indiscriminately punish someone, without even understanding the situation first. No wonder there are so many water ghosts at the bottom of Burial River. Apart from the great demon causing trouble, the two of you can't escape blame either. The old woman and the old cultivator became pale with fright. Words spoken by a noble scholar from a Confucian academy were like gold and jade, each word weighing hundreds upon thousands of kilograms. These words definitely wouldn't be trivial. The large number of water ghosts in Burial River is mostly my fault, the water goddess said in a solemn voice. Zhong Kuei flicked his sleeve, not giving the water goddess any face at all as he replied. These are two different matters. These two people have such important positions, yet they're trying to slack off wherever they can. They're unwilling to ask a single question to better understand a given situation, and they're unwilling to think for a second more before making their reckless decisions. Such malfeasance. They're not wealthy nobles who can lie there and enjoy wealth. Rather, they're important officials who should be diligently completing their tasks. Each and every one of their actions will affect the fortunes of mountains and rivers of the imperial court. The old woman and the old cultivator were both filled with terror and grief. By the looks of it, the young noble scholar had already linked their actions to the fortune of the imperial court. If he took things even further and linked their actions to the principles of the Confucian academies, then wouldn't they be completely done for? Wouldn't they be consigned to eternal damnation? The old woman fell to her knees and begged for forgiveness, promising that she would never make such a mistake again in the future. The old cultivator also bowed and cupped his hands in respect, saying that he had betrayed the trust of the imperial court, and that he would definitely do his best and serve to his dying day. Zhong Kuei humped coldly and said, "Since this is the first time, I'll let Miss Water Goddess decide your punishment." The two people hurriedly stood up straight and thanked the noble scholar. They then turned to the Water Goddess to apologize and beg for forgiveness. Zhong Kuei couldn't help but find these two people an eyesore, so he scolded, "Are you not going to hurry up and return to the temple to shut yourselves away and reflect on your mistakes? Stop making a fool of yourselves out here." The old woman and the old cultivator scurried away in a disheveled manner. Zhong Kuei turned to the short Water Goddess and said with a serious expression, "As the Water Goddess of Burial River, who's respected and revered by everyone in this area, you should at least control your subordinates and not just focus on that river demon. Being a deity and enjoying offerings of incense is not solely for the sake of fighting enemies all the time. If the worshippers who offer incense are sincere, then even receiving just a single stick of incense a year won't be considered suffering a break between offerings. If everyone in your jurisdiction is blinded by greed, then what does it matter if they come here to offer incense? They're merely here to seek riches, and they have little respect and sincerity toward you. A sea of incense smoke has wafted through your temple for hundreds of years with no break, and there are even hundreds of people mingling outside and waiting to enter to offer incense in your temple. In fact, your temple is even more bustling than Mirage City's scholarly temple and city god pavilion. Mortal humans might not be aware of how many kilograms of genuine incense offerings you receive each day, and the temple attendant might not be aware of this either. Yet, as the Water Goddess of Burial River, can you possibly be unaware of this? If it weren't for the female deity in the side hall helping you attract the sincere incense offerings of so many women, your water god temple and green roving residence would have already been destroyed by that supremely talented river demon long ago. The Water Goddess felt a rare sense of guilt and shame. Zhong Kuei didn't say anything else. Meanwhile, Chun Pingin's mind had already calmed down. During his 2 trips through Majestic World, he had only heard outsiders mention Mr. Qi and the scholarly sage a total of 3 times. There was city god Shun, one from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's colorful garment nation, the old Taoist priest in the lotus flower blessed land who had mentioned the theory of sequential order, and then the Water Goddess of Burial River standing in front of him right now. The Water Goddess had surprisingly read a book written by the scholarly sage before, and she had even ended up becoming an admirer of the scholarly sage. Moreover, she wasn't just a normal admirer, but a downright fanatic. Indeed, even Chun Pingin didn't dare to claim that the paramount sage was only just knowledgeable enough to be considered an equal to the second sage. When Cui Dongshan talked about his past teacher, he only described the scholarly sage's knowledge as exceedingly lofty and grand, like a rising sun in the eyes of many scholars. He didn't compare the scholarly sage to any other sage who was worshipped in the Confucian temples. In any case, asking Great Subduing Academy for a Confucian classic and worshipping this classic in her temple would directly have an influence on the fundamental qualities of her gold statue. Moreover, this matter also pertained to the promotion of the Water Goddess Green Roving Residence to Green Roving Palace, a type of promotion that many mountain gods and river gods dreamed of. Chun Pingin felt shocked and confused by the short Water Goddess decision. Yet he felt joy from the bottom of his heart as well. It was as if he had finally found a like-minded person in a boundless sea of people. Zhong Kuei turned to Chun Pingin and asked, "Do you know why they listen to me? It's not just because of the 2 slaps. And it's not necessarily because of my status as a noble scholar either." Chun Pingin was indeed curious, so he sincerely asked, "Can you please explain?" A gallant expression was on Zhong Kuei's face as he replied. It's because the Confucian academies have used the various Confucian classics to educate people for thousands upon thousands of years. This has allowed the 72 Confucian academies to gain a strong standing in the 9 continents. At the same time, everyone respects and fears the Confucian academies, regardless of whether they're from the mountains or from outside the mountains. If Confucian scholars from the academies only rely on martial power to subdue others, then people will naturally yield on the surface but remain dissatisfied on the inside. There are many disadvantages to relying on martial power alone. In other words, my predecessors have planted the trees, and I'm simply enjoying their shade. Chen Ping'an found the current situation a little strange. Zhong Kuei's actions and manner of speech at this moment were starkly different from normal. Of course, there wasn't anything wrong with what Zhong Kuei had said. Zhong Kuei's eyes darted around for a few seconds, and he stood as if he were pricking up his ears and listening out for something. He chuckled and said, "Teacher is finally gone, so I'm fairly confident that I've already muddled through the troubles tonight. I'm going to enjoy fortune thanks to this misfortune. Haha, perhaps teacher will even spare me a few words of praise the next time I return to the academy." Chen Ping'an was rendered speechless. This was the Zhong Kuei who he was familiar with. This was a huge eye-opener for the water goddess, and she almost started to suspect whether this person was faking his position as a noble scholar. Zhong Kuei patted his belly and remarked, "My stomach is rumbling after hearing you mention that bowl of stir-fried eel noodles just then. How about we go to your green roving residence for a midnight snack?" Chen Ping'an frowned and said, "There are some snack stalls right over there." Chen Ping'an was no longer a naive young boy who knew nothing about the world. Not only had the scholarly sage's statue been removed from the Confucian temple and smashed into pieces, but all of his works had been banned and destroyed in the entire majestic world as well. Back then, the 72 Confucian academies in the 9 continents had all been involved in this, with either their mountain master or at least a noble scholar responsible for supervising the local governments as they destroyed the scholarly sage's works. It had been a comprehensive process where no oversights were allowed. Once Chen Ping'an became involved in this situation between the water goddess of Burial River, the imperial court of the Great Quan Empire, and Great Subduing Academy, then it was entirely possible that he would end up harming himself and harming others if someone with ulterior motives were to take advantage of his involvement in the matter. The competition between the 2 scholarly lineages had already come to an end, and there was no need for future generations to debate over this anymore. Why was this? This was because the sages had already spoken every principle and made every argument possible. The short and petite water goddess seemed to change her mind as well, and she started to actively invite the 2 of them to her green roving residence, saying with a smile, "How can the stalls outside the temple compare to the food made in my green roving residence? Come on, let's go. I can also take this opportunity to open a pot of fine wine that's been aging for 100 years to welcome my 2 esteemed guests." In reality, she wanted to borrow the noble scholar's might to suppress the 2 guest elders from the Great Quan Empire, and deter them from lingering outside her green roving residence and continuing to pester her. The water goddess was extremely proud of herself, thinking that her tricks were no inferior to that of the river demon. The more she thought about this, the happier she became. In the end, she started to chuckle giddily to herself. Chen Ping'an felt a little helpless. The water goddess was far too honest and naive. Judging by her expression, was it not abundantly clear that tonight's meal in the green roving residence wouldn't come easy? Couldn't she have waited until she tricked the 2 of them to her place before she started to chuckle in glee? Zhong Kuei pretended to be blind and oblivious to all of this as he dragged Chen Ping'an along, saying that he wanted to see whether that pot of 100-year-old wine could compare to the Borderin's 5-year-old green plum wine. The water goddess was already unable to conceal the fact that she had come to the water god temple tonight, especially since Zhong Kuei had openly scolded and punished the temple attendant. That being the case, she decided to openly use her powers, making a grabbing motion at Burial River and causing the water to instantly churn. A large column of water rose above the river, transforming into a lifelike yellow flood dragon that measured 300 meters in length as it flew onto land. It arrived outside the water god temple and gently lowered its head. The water goddess immediately leaped onto the flood dragon's head, and Zhong Kuei also dragged Chen Ping'an along with him as he jumped onto the flood dragon's neck. The flood dragon turned around and re-entered Burial River, rapidly swimming toward green roving residents located further downstream. Upon personally witnessing the water goddess reveal her impressive might and mystical powers, the people waiting outside the temple all fell to their knees and kowtowed in her direction. Their faces were full of joy when they stood up, and they thought to themselves that this trip to the temple was absolutely worthwhile. To see the water goddess show herself and reveal her incredible powers. Just how fortunate and blessed were they. It wasn't long before the water goddess, Zhong Kuei, and Chen Ping'an arrived at green roving residence. The residence appeared to be located quite far away from Burial River, yet in reality, it was connected to the water veins underground. Green roving residence was located in the center of a formation, allowing it to gather the water essence of Burial River and absorb the fortune provided by the incense offerings that were contained within the river. This was the foundation of the water goddess power. The gold statue located in the water god temple was only an external manifestation. While being refused entry, the master and disciple from the Golden Summit Taoist temple, Taoist preserving innocence in Miaofeng and Xiao Yuanran, had enjoyed a delicious midnight meal. The old steward had asked the chef to cook some fragrant dishes, and he had further paired this with 2 pots of beautiful wine, offering this to the 2 guest elders of the Great Quan Empire who had claimed that they wouldn't leave unless they were granted an audience with the water goddess. The old steward felt a little guilty, largely due to how good-tempered the 2 visitors from afar were. They hadn't tried to barge into green roving residence, nor had they issued any threats. Instead, Miaofeng had simply smiled and asked him for a meal. The old steward, who had initially been afraid of being killed, was extremely grateful to the 2 Taoist priests. The flood dragon transformed into a small stream that quickly vanished into the ground outside green roving residence. Zhong Kuei came to a realization upon seeing the situation outside the residence. He glanced at the short woman standing beside him, and the water goddess simply chuckled awkwardly as she played dumb. The 2 Taoist priests immediately stood up upon seeing Zhong Kuei, and they walked down the steps before bowing in greeting and introducing themselves. Even though they hadn't personally witnessed Zhong Kuei's soul and Yang soul leaving the border and to punish the 2 princes, Miaofeng had already heard of Zhong Kuei's resounding reputation a long time ago. The first time they had noticed him in the border regions was due to the fact a disheveled scholar in azure would appear in the distance every time the mounted troops of the Yao clan became involved in an intense battle. This scholar in azure would observe from a distance, but he would never interfere in the battle. Afterward, he would silently leave when the battle drew to a close. However, he would quietly appear again when an intense battle flared up somewhere else. Using his position as a guest elder of the imperial court, Miaofeng had inquired Mirage City about this situation. Surprisingly, however, not a single person had been able to determine this person's identity and background. In the end, he had gone through the Golden Summit Taoist temple to finally learn that the scholar in azure was Zhong Kuei, the youngest noble scholar in the history of Great Subduing Academy. He had become a virtuous scholar at 12, a noble scholar at 18, and he had further received the honorific title of righteous at 20. This honorific title wasn't something that the mountain masters of the Confucian academies could hand out. Rather, it could only be bestowed by the sage from the Confucian school in which the noble scholar's lineage belonged. Not only that, but it was also necessary to receive approval from several of the sages who were worshipped in the Confucian temple. Only then could one receive the honorific title and become a righteous noble scholar. This was because righteous noble scholars were also referred to as quasi-sages. Great Subduing Academy was less renowned than the 2 other Confucian academies in the north and south of Parasol Leaf continent, but within the Confucian orthodoxy of the continent and in the eyes of the sect-level forces in the area, Zhong Kuei was a very likable person since he was a scholar born and raised in the continent. In order to invite noble scholar Zhong Kuei to their nation as a guest and guardian, several of the most powerful empires in Parasol Leaf continent were trying their utmost to forge a good relationship with Great Subduing Academy. In fact, even the abbot of the Golden Summit Taoist temple might have to treat noble scholar Zhong Kuei as an equal if he were to come across him. Hence, Miaofeng and Xiao Yuanran didn't dare to show even the slightest hint of disrespect toward Zhong Kuei. Right now, Xiao Yuanran even felt like his master was purposely acting respectful and even a little obsequious toward Zhong Kuei. This made the cultivation prodigy from Golden Summit Taoist temple feel a little uncomfortable. However, he didn't let these emotions show on his face. However, Miaofeng had no option but to act in an ingratiating manner. Now was a critical time regarding the promotion of Green Roving Residence to Green Roving Palace, so as the prized disciple of Great Subduing Academy's Mountain Master, it was perhaps possible for Zhong Kuei to give the final word and bring this matter to a close. At that time, Miaofeng would have not only completed his secret mission from Mirage City, but he would have also helped the Great Quan Empire build a good relationship with this righteous noble scholar destined to become a Confucian sage in the future. Thanks to this, Miaofeng's prized disciple, Xiao Yuanran, would also gain an additional backer apart from Golden Summit Taoist Temple. Zhong Kuei had naturally come across this pair of Taoist priests cultivating in the world before. Moreover, he had come across them more than once. He didn't have a bad impression of them, but he didn't have a very good impression of them either. Otherwise, he would have greeted them long ago. Miaofeng explained his reason for visiting Green Roving Residence tonight, yet Zhong Kuei discovered that the water goddess of Burial River was acting as if this had nothing to do with her at all. This was both exasperating and amusing. However, this was also his reason for visiting Burial River tonight, and the matter regarding the river demon bribing officials in Mirage City wasn't simple either. This was something that went below his bottom line. Thus, Zhong Kuei was extremely straightforward as he looked at Miaofeng and replied, "I'll try to persuade Miss Water Goddess regarding the Confucian classic that she wants to enshrine in Green Roving Residence. The two of you can rest assured and report this to Mirage City. Of course, you can be more flexible with your report, and you'll naturally receive credit if everything goes smoothly. If things don't work out, however, you won't be scolded either. As for why I'm helping the two of you, I naturally have my own reasons. The two of you don't need to blindly speculate." Miaofeng was extremely grateful as he thanked Zhong Kuei and took his leave with his disciple, Xiao Yuanran. The old woman, the temple attendant of the Burial River's water god temple, was a trusted subordinate of the local governor. Apart from receiving a reference from the governor, she had also spent a lot of her own money to build relationships with officials from the Ministry of Rights in Mirage City. It was thanks to these things that she had landed this incredibly lucrative job. Many Qi refiners were extremely jealous of her. The young noble scholar from Great Subduing Academy could kill her with a single wave of his hand. Why had the Great Quan Empire flourished for the past few decades? Why was it showing signs of becoming the alliance leader in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent? Apart from the wisdom and power of the emperor and the remarkable talents of the scholarly officials and military generals, there was actually another reason that everyone was well aware of. A noble scholar was staying in Mirage City. Meanwhile, neighboring countries like Northern Jian Nation and Southern Qi Nation didn't even have a virtuous scholar. Focusing back on the Water God Temple, the fact that Zhong Kuei was such a young noble scholar was already an immense deterrence in and of itself. There was a huge difference between someone in their 30s or 40s working extremely hard to become a champion scholar and a young prodigy becoming a champion scholar in their first attempt. Right now, the old woman and the old cultivator who had returned to shore were like little children waiting to be punished after they had done something wrong. They were old immortals in the eyes of mortal people, but their relationship with Green Roving Residence was very ordinary. They were aware that the water goddess sincerely looked down on them from the bottom of her heart, and it was only because of the old woman's relationship with the governor and the imperial court that she turned a blind eye to them. The water goddess would leave them be as long as they didn't take things too far when trying to make money. However, tonight was going to be a little more painful because the water goddess and the water god temple were no longer on their side and protecting them. You were going to take advantage of your positions and power to indiscriminately punish someone, without even understanding the situation first. No wonder there are so many water ghosts at the bottom of Burial River. Apart from the great demon causing trouble, the two of you can't escape blame either. The old woman and the old cultivator became pale with fright. Words spoken by a noble scholar from a Confucian academy were like gold and jade, each word weighing hundreds upon thousands of kilograms. These words definitely wouldn't be trivial. The large number of water ghosts in Burial River is mostly my fault, the water goddess said in a solemn voice. Zhong Kuei flicked his sleeve, not giving the water goddess any face at all as he replied, "These are two different matters. These two people have such important positions, yet they're trying to slack off wherever they can. They're unwilling to ask a single question to better understand a given situation, and they're unwilling to think for a second more before making their reckless decisions. Such malfeasance. They're not wealthy nobles who can lie there and enjoy wealth. Rather, they're important officials who should be diligently completing their tasks. Each and every one of their actions will affect the fortunes of mountains and rivers of the imperial court. The old woman and the old cultivator were both filled with terror and grief. By the looks of it, the young noble scholar had already linked their actions to the fortune of the imperial court. If he took things even further and linked their actions to the principles of the Confucian academies, then wouldn't they be completely done for? Wouldn't they be consigned to eternal damnation? The old woman fell to her knees and begged for forgiveness, promising that she would never make such a mistake again in the future. The old cultivator also bowed and cupped his hands in respect, saying that he had betrayed the trust of the imperial court, and that he would definitely do his best and serve to his dying day. Zhong Kuei humped coldly and said, "Since this is the first time, I'll let Miss Water Goddess decide your punishment." The two people hurriedly stood up straight and thanked the noble scholar. They then turned to the Water Goddess to apologize and beg for forgiveness. Zhong Kuei couldn't help but find these two people an eyesore, so he scolded, "Are you not going to hurry up and return to the temple to shut yourselves away and reflect on your mistakes? Stop making a fool of yourselves out here." The old woman and the old cultivator scurried away in a disheveled manner. Zhong Kuei turned to the short Water Goddess and said with a serious expression, "As the Water Goddess of Burial River, who's respected and revered by everyone in this area, you should at least control your subordinates and not just focus on that river demon. Being a deity and enjoying offerings of incense is not solely for the sake of fighting enemies all the time. If the worshippers who offer incense are sincere, then even receiving just a single stick of incense a year won't be considered suffering a break between offerings. If everyone in your jurisdiction is blinded by greed, then what does it matter if they come here to offer incense? They're merely here to seek riches, and they have little respect and sincerity toward you. A sea of incense smoke has wafted through your temple for hundreds of years with no break, and there are even hundreds of people mingling outside and waiting to enter to offer incense in your temple. In fact, your temple is even more bustling than Mirage City's scholarly temple and city god pavilion. Mortal humans might not be aware of how many kilograms of genuine incense offerings you receive each day, and the temple attendant might not be aware of this either. Yet, as the Water Goddess of Burial River, can you possibly be unaware of this? If it weren't for the female deity in the side hall helping you attract the sincere incense offerings of so many women, your water god temple and green roving residence would have already been destroyed by that supremely talented river demon long ago." The Water Goddess felt a rare sense of guilt and shame. Zhong Kuei didn't say anything else. Meanwhile, Chen Pingin's mind had already calmed down. During his 2 trips through Majestic World, he had only heard outsiders mention Mr. Qi and the scholarly sage a total of 3 times. There was city god Shun, one from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's colorful garment nation, the old Taoist priest in the lotus flower blessed land who had mentioned the theory of sequential order, and then the Water Goddess of Burial River standing in front of him right now. The Water Goddess had surprisingly read a book written by the scholarly sage before, and she had even ended up becoming an admirer of the scholarly sage. Moreover, she wasn't just a normal admirer, but a downright fanatic. Indeed, even Chen Pingin didn't dare to claim that the paramount sage was only just knowledgeable enough to be considered an equal to the second sage. When Cui Dongshan talked about his past teacher, he only described the scholarly sage's knowledge as exceedingly lofty and grand, like a rising sun in the eyes of many scholars. He didn't compare the scholarly sage to any other sage who was worshipped in the Confucian temples. In any case, asking Great Subduing Academy for a Confucian classic and worshipping this classic in her temple would directly have an influence on the fundamental qualities of her gold statue. Moreover, this matter also pertained to the promotion of the Water Goddess Green Roving Residence to Green Roving Palace, a type of promotion that many mountain gods and river gods dreamed of. Chen Pingin felt shocked and confused by the short Water Goddess decision. Yet he felt joy from the bottom of his heart as well. It was as if he had finally found a like-minded person in a boundless sea of people. Zhong Kuei turned to Chen Pingin and asked, "Do you know why they listen to me? It's not just because of the 2 slaps. And it's not necessarily because of my status as a noble scholar either." Chen Pingin was indeed curious, so he sincerely asked, "Can you please explain?" A gallant expression was on Zhong Kuei's face as he replied. It's because the Confucian academies have used the various Confucian classics to educate people for thousands upon thousands of years. This has allowed the 72 Confucian academies to gain a strong standing in the 9 continents. At the same time, everyone respects and fears the Confucian academies, regardless of whether they're from the mountains or from outside the mountains. If Confucian scholars from the academies only rely on martial power to subdue others, then people will naturally yield on the surface but remain dissatisfied on the inside. There are many disadvantages to relying on martial power alone. In other words, my predecessors have planted the trees, and I'm simply enjoying their shade. Chen Ping'an found the current situation a little strange. Zhong Kuei's actions and manner of speech at this moment were starkly different from normal. Of course, there wasn't anything wrong with what Zhong Kuei had said. Zhong Kuei's eyes darted around for a few seconds, and he stood as if he were pricking up his ears and listening out for something. He chuckled and said, "Teacher is finally gone, so I'm fairly confident that I've already muddled through the troubles tonight. I'm going to enjoy fortune thanks to this misfortune. Haha, perhaps teacher will even spare me a few words of praise the next time I return to the academy." Chen Ping'an was rendered speechless. This was the Zhong Kuei who he was familiar with. This was a huge eye-opener for the water goddess, and she almost started to suspect whether this person was faking his position as a noble scholar. Zhong Kuei patted his belly and remarked, "My stomach is rumbling after hearing you mention that bowl of stir-fried eel noodles just then. How about we go to your green roving residence for a midnight snack?" Chen Ping'an frowned and said, "There are some snack stalls right over there." Chen Ping'an was no longer a naive young boy who knew nothing about the world. Not only had the scholarly sage's statue been removed from the Confucian temple and smashed into pieces, but all of his works had been banned and destroyed in the entire majestic world as well. Back then, the 72 Confucian academies in the 9 continents had all been involved in this, with either their mountain master or at least a noble scholar responsible for supervising the local governments as they destroyed the scholarly sage's works. It had been a comprehensive process where no oversights were allowed. Once Chen Ping'an became involved in this situation between the water goddess of Burial River, the imperial court of the Great Quan Empire, and Great Subduing Academy, then it was entirely possible that he would end up harming himself and harming others if someone with ulterior motives were to take advantage of his involvement in the matter. The competition between the 2 scholarly lineages had already come to an end, and there was no need for future generations to debate over this anymore. Why was this? This was because the sages had already spoken every principle and made every argument possible. The short and petite water goddess seemed to change her mind as well, and she started to actively invite the 2 of them to her green roving residence, saying with a smile, "How can the stalls outside the temple compare to the food made in my green roving residence? Come on, let's go. I can also take this opportunity to open a pot of fine wine that's been aging for 100 years to welcome my 2 esteemed guests." In reality, she wanted to borrow the noble scholar's might to suppress the 2 guest elders from the Great Quan Empire, and deter them from lingering outside her green roving residence and continuing to pester her. The water goddess was extremely proud of herself, thinking that her tricks were no inferior to that of the river demon. The more she thought about this, the happier she became. In the end, she started to chuckle giddily to herself. Chen Ping'an felt a little helpless. The water goddess was far too honest and naive. Judging by her expression, was it not abundantly clear that tonight's meal in the green roving residence wouldn't come easy? Couldn't she have waited until she tricked the 2 of them to her place before she started to chuckle in glee? Zhong Kuei pretended to be blind and oblivious to all of this as he dragged Chen Ping'an along, saying that he wanted to see whether that pot of 100-year-old wine could compare to the Borderin's 5-year-old green plum wine. The water goddess was already unable to conceal the fact that she had come to the water god temple tonight, especially since Zhong Kuei had openly scolded and punished the temple attendant. That being the case, she decided to openly use her powers, making a grabbing motion at Burial River and causing the water to instantly churn. A large column of water rose above the river, transforming into a lifelike yellow flood dragon that measured 300 meters in length as it flew onto land. It arrived outside the water god temple and gently lowered its head. The water goddess immediately leaped onto the flood dragon's head, and Zhong Kuei also dragged Chen Ping'an along with him as he jumped onto the flood dragon's neck. The flood dragon turned around and re-entered Burial River, rapidly swimming toward green roving residents located further downstream. Upon personally witnessing the water goddess reveal her impressive might and mystical powers, the people waiting outside the temple all fell to their knees and kowtowed in her direction. Their faces were full of joy when they stood up, and they thought to themselves that this trip to the temple was absolutely worthwhile. To see the water goddess show herself and reveal her incredible powers. Just how fortunate and blessed were they. It wasn't long before the water goddess, Zhong Kuei, and Chen Ping'an arrived at green roving residence. The residence appeared to be located quite far away from Burial River, yet in reality, it was connected to the water veins underground. Green roving residence was located in the center of a formation, allowing it to gather the water essence of Burial River and absorb the fortune provided by the incense offerings that were contained within the river. This was the foundation of the water goddess power. The gold statue located in the water god temple was only an external manifestation. While being refused entry, the master and disciple from the Golden Summit Taoist Temple, Taoist preserving innocence Miaofeng and Xiao Yuanran, had enjoyed a delicious midnight meal. The old steward had asked the chef to cook some fragrant dishes, and he had further paired this with 2 pots of beautiful wine, offering this to the 2 guest elders of the Great Quan Empire who had claimed that they wouldn't leave unless they were granted an audience with the water goddess. The old steward felt a little guilty, largely due to how good-tempered the 2 visitors from afar were. They hadn't tried to barge into green roving residence, nor had they issued any threats. Instead, Miaofeng had simply smiled and asked him for a meal. The old steward, who had initially been afraid of being killed, was extremely grateful to the 2 Taoist priests. The flood dragon transformed into a small stream that quickly vanished into the ground outside green roving residence. Zhong Kuei came to a realization upon seeing the situation outside the residence. He glanced at the short woman standing beside him, and the water goddess simply chuckled awkwardly as she played dumb. The 2 Taoist priests immediately stood up upon seeing Zhong Kuei, and they walked down the steps before bowing in greeting and introducing themselves. Even though they hadn't personally witnessed Zhong Kuei's soul and Yang soul leaving the border and to punish the 2 princes, Miaofeng had already heard of Zhong Kuei's resounding reputation a long time ago. The first time they had noticed him in the border regions was due to the fact a disheveled scholar in azure would appear in the distance every time the mounted troops of the Yao clan became involved in an intense battle. This scholar in azure would observe from a distance, but he would never interfere in the battle. Afterward, he would silently leave when the battle drew to a close. However, he would quietly appear again when an intense battle flared up somewhere else. Using his position as a guest elder of the imperial court, Miaofeng had inquired Mirage City about this situation. Surprisingly, however, not a single person had been able to determine this person's identity and background. In the end, he had gone through the Golden Summit Taoist Temple to finally learn that the scholar in azure was Zhong Kuei, the youngest noble scholar in the history of Great Subduing Academy. He had become a virtuous scholar at 12, a noble scholar at 18, and he had further received the honorific title of righteous at 20. This honorific title wasn't something that the mountain masters of the Confucian academies could hand out. Rather, it could only be bestowed by the sage from the Confucian school in which the noble scholar's lineage belonged. Not only that, but it was also necessary to receive approval from several of the sages who were worshipped in the Confucian temple. Only then could one receive the honorific title and become a righteous noble scholar. This was because righteous noble scholars were also referred to as quasi-sages. Great Subduing Academy was less renowned than the 2 other Confucian academies in the north and south of Parasol Leaf Continent, but within the Confucian orthodoxy of the continent and in the eyes of the sect-level forces in the area, Zhong Kuei was a very likable person since he was a scholar born and raised in the continent. In order to invite noble scholar Zhong Kuei to their nation as a guest and guardian, several of the most powerful empires in Parasol Leaf Continent were trying their utmost to forge a good relationship with Great Subduing Academy. In fact, even the abbot of the Golden Summit Taoist Temple might have to treat noble scholar Zhong Kuei as an equal if he were to come across him. Hence, Miaofeng and Xiao Yuanran didn't dare to show even the slightest hint of disrespect toward Zhong Kuei. Right now, Xiao Yuanran even felt like his master was purposely acting respectful and even a little obsequious toward Zhong Kuei. This made the cultivation prodigy from Golden Summit Taoist Temple feel a little uncomfortable. However, he didn't let these emotions show on his face. However, Miaofeng had no option but to act in an ingratiating manner. Now was a critical time regarding the promotion of Green Roving Residence to Green Roving Palace, so as the prized disciple of Great Subduing Academy's Mountain Master, it was perhaps possible for Zhong Kuei to give the final word and bring this matter to a close. At that time, Miaofeng would have not only completed his secret mission from Mirage City, but he would have also helped the Great Quan Empire build a good relationship with this righteous noble scholar destined to become a Confucian sage in the future. Thanks to this, Miaofeng's prized disciple, Xiao Yuanran, would also gain an additional backer apart from Golden Summit Taoist Temple. Zhong Kuei had naturally come across this pair of Taoist priests cultivating in the world before. Moreover, he had come across them more than once. He didn't have a bad impression of them, but he didn't have a very good impression of them either. Otherwise, he would have greeted them long ago. Miaofeng explained his reason for visiting Green Roving Residence tonight, yet Zhong Kuei discovered that the water goddess of Burial River was acting as if this had nothing to do with her at all. This was both exasperating and amusing. However, this was also his reason for visiting Burial River tonight, and the matter regarding the river demon bribing officials in Mirage City wasn't simple either. This was something that went below his bottom line. Thus, Zhong Kuei was extremely straightforward as he looked at Miaofeng and replied, "I'll try to persuade Miss Water Goddess regarding the Confucian classic that she wants to enshrine in Green Roving Residence. The two of you can rest assured and report this to Mirage City. Of course, you can be more flexible with your report, and you'll naturally receive credit if everything goes smoothly. If things don't work out, however, you won't be scolded either. As for why I'm helping the two of you, I naturally have my own reasons. The two of you don't need to blindly speculate." Miaofeng was extremely grateful as he thanked Zhong Kuei and took his leave with his disciple, Xiao Yuanran. The old steward led the way for the esteemed water goddess and the seemingly even more esteemed guest to the guest hall. Chen Ping'an walked next to Zhong Kuei and observed the scenery in Green Roving Residence. There was a lively and vivid painting of the water god temple and burial river on some spirit wall, and the wafting smoke in the painting drifted around the wall. Not only that, but he could also hear the gushing sound of the churning river. Apart from Zhong Kuei, the water goddess was the only person who could see Chen Ping'an was actually just a yin soul. The two Taoist priests had failed to notice this. Of course, this was partly because the Water God Temple and Green Roving Residence were both part of the Water Goddess territory. As for the River Demon and the Water Ghosts, the former had chosen to travel along Burial River to advance its cultivation, and it had already come close to rivaling the Water Goddess in power, especially when it was in the Burial River. As a result, this River Demon was also able to see through Chen Ping'an. Meanwhile, the latter were like drunkards who had smelled the fragrance of wine. It was because of this that they were innately drawn to Chen Ping'an. They arrived at a large hall where the candles were as thick as arms. The water goddess bowl of stir-fried eel noodles was still sitting on the table. Chen Ping'an was rendered speechless with shock when he saw the so-called bowl. Meanwhile, Zhong Kuei was completely unfazed as he sat down and said to the water goddess with a smile, "I want some stir-fried eel noodles as well. I don't need such a big bowl, just a small plate will do." The water goddess nodded in acknowledgement before turning to Chen Ping'an and asking, "Do you want a midnight snack as well?" Unlike yang souls, which were essentially a second body for cultivators, yin souls couldn't eat the delicacies of the world. Instead, yin souls could only absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to nurture themselves. A water goddess and a noble scholar sat at the same table, both enjoying their own servings of stir-fried eel noodles. Zhong Kuei's voice sounded in Chen Ping'an's mind saying, "This water goddess is extremely skilled at refining weapons. I'm not sure how, but she managed to obtain an ancient inheritance. The rain-praying poem from that stone tablet is actually a mantra used to refine the weapons. I've heard that this is a very high-grade mantra, the fundamental mantra that some immortal at the upper 5 tiers used to attain the Tao. As a result, some people covet this mantra and care about it immensely. However, they can only take things slowly due to their position and reputation." Just like Zhong Kuei had said, the water goddess of Burial River had refined 9 weapons in total. 2 of them reached the level of immortal treasures, and all were powerful weapons that had allowed her to comfortably suppress the river demon during the past 200 years. 3 of them had been destroyed during their fights, but this didn't deter her. She still had plenty. When women in the world left home to go on an outing, they would change their makeup and change their clothes depending on their mood. When the water goddess of Burial River left home to patrol her territory, however, she would switch her weapons depending on her mood. After finally finishing her large bowl of stir-fried eel noodles, the water goddess placed all her cards on the table and spoke frankly to Zhong Kuei. Please be honest with me, noble scholar. Will Great Subduing Academy find an excuse to destroy my green roving residence if I insist on asking for a Confucian classic written by the scholarly sage? Or will the Academy purposely make things difficult for the Great Quan Empire, ensuring that the empire is eventually destroyed by Northern Jin Nation and Southern Qi Nation? Chen Ping'an looked at the water goddess with newfound respect. Zhong Kuei smiled and shook his head. Great Subduing Academy won't stoop to such low and barbaric deeds. At most, Green Roving Residence will be ruining its own future potential. It will no longer have the opportunity to be promoted to Green Roving Palace regardless of how many significant contributions you or the Great Quan Empire make. There's one thing that you need to keep in mind. No matter the reason, whether you feel current offer for promotion is undeserved or whether you genuinely admire the principles expounded by the scholarly sage, the fact remains unchanged that you've rejected the goodwill of Great Subduing Academy. Thus, the Academy will record this matter and place it in the archives. Even if you bring fortune and prosperity to the common people in the future, your Green Roving Residence will still maintain the same status as always. It won't receive a promotion. If you feel like the Academy is being unfair at that time, then why not think about the choices that you made today? The water goddess nodded and replied, I'll remember this. I definitely won't blame Great Subduing Academy in the future. In any case, I'm the one who has offended the might and dignity of Great Subduing Academy. Oh, so you also know this, huh? Zhong Kuei said with a cold chuckle. A measly water goddess and her residents actually daring to refuse the edict of Great Subduing Academy. Was this not a huge joke in the eyes of the 3 other Confucian academies in Parasol Leaf Continent? Truth be told, Zhong Kuei was facing immense pressure and taking a huge risk by offering these seemingly casual conclusions. Scholars cared most about their face, so they might not become too angry if they were forced to suffer a huge loss in secret. However, they would most likely pick up their brushes and write essays to kill if they were humiliated in public. Because of this, Zhong Kuei's words tonight were the biggest shield for Green Roving Residence and the Water God Temple of Burial River. After all, he had stated that Great Subduing Academy wouldn't stoop so low as to find excuses to destroy these places. Moreover, there was no doubt that Zhong Kuei was going to become the next mountain master of Great Subduing Academy. In fact, some people even claimed that Zhong Kuei had a chance to become the mountain master of a Confucian school. The water goddess smiled awkwardly and asked, Do you want another bowl of noodles? Zhong Kuei clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, Using one bowl of noodles to save Green Roving Residence and using another bowl of noodles to save the Great Quan Empire? Miss Water Goddess, what a brilliant plan you've cooked up. Even though he said this, Zhong Kuei still accepted the offer for another bowl of noodles, because the noodles were truly delicious. The water goddess instructed her subordinates to bring 2 pots of fine wine, and the fragrance of this wine was far superior to most of the wines that Chen Ping'an had enjoyed before. Disregarding the Forgetting Sorrow wine from Stalactite Mountain, perhaps only the Osmanthus wine from Osmanthus Island was able to rival this wine. However, as a Yin soul, Chen Ping'an was able to enjoy neither the noodles nor the wine. Before drinking, the water goddess had explicitly reminded everyone that they shouldn't drink too much of this 100-year-old wine. Each person should only drink 3 bowls at most. Otherwise, even gods and immortals would become drunk. And thus, Chen Ping'an saw the 2 of them drinking 4 large bowls of wine each, completely emptying the pots in front of them. Afterward, the water goddess even instructed her subordinates to bring another pot of wine over. This allowed Chen Ping'an to witness the terrible behavior of these 2 drunkards after they became inebriated. Zhong Kuei started to wail in grief as he called Jianyang's name. As for the water goddess, she started to speak very loudly, occasionally smacking the table to boost her might. She lifted a leg and placed her foot on the chair before pointing at herself with her thumb and asking Zhong Kuei, whom she had just become brothers with, What does one rely on when traveling through the cultivation world? Zhong Kuei was still mumbling about Jianyang. The water goddess answered her own question, exclaiming, Having a backbone. One has to stand up straight and have a strong fist. One has to be honest and forthright when they speak and act. Brother Zhongkue, I feel like you're a decent and responsible person, and you also seem very manly. That's why I've agreed to become brothers with you. Just give me a yell if you need any help in the future. Chen Ping'an was feeling quite bored as he sat beside them. He thought to himself that if the little boy in azure were present, he would definitely pat his chest in a deafening manner and exclaim that friendship and loyalty were the most important things. Zhongkue raised his hand and pointed at the seat opposite him, yet his finger somehow ended up missing the water goddess completely. His eyes were drunken and bleary as he replied, "Isn't traveling through the cultivation world something for martial artists to worry about? As a water goddess? No, on second thought it seems the most authentic and legitimate for water gods to talk about traveling through the cultivation world." Alright then, let's pretend that you're correct. However, having a backbone isn't enough to feed oneself. The water goddess raised an eyebrow and took a large swig of wine before slurring. I always have food to eat. I always eat until I'm stuffed. There's braised snake meat, there's stir-fried eel noodles, and there's much more. I've heard that my chef used to work in the imperial kitchen and cook for the emperor. His cooking skills are top-notch, so having a backbone is still important. Zhongkue shook his head and replied, "You can have your backbone, but what has that got to do with me? I only want Jianyang." Chen Ping'an stood up, planning to walk to the door of the hall to enjoy the scenery. He wasn't able to drink the beautiful wine in front of him, so sitting here and looking at it was a truly frustrating feeling. Zhongkue suddenly sat up straight at this moment, shaking his azure robe and dispersing the strong smell of wine. Meanwhile, the water goddess' head smashed into the table with a loud thump. She then cocked her head to the side and fell deep asleep. Chen Ping'an turned around and looked back and saw the back of a man dressed in Confucian robes. Zhongkue bowed and cupped his hands in respect, saying, "Student Zhongkue pays his respects to teacher." The man's voice was deep and resonant, and he said slowly, "An external disciple of the planchette writing sect inadvertently exposed a huge calamity not long ago. This news was delivered to the academy, but the perpetrator noticed something amiss before we could finish our planning and preparations. The perpetrator is a great demon at the upper 5 tiers, and almost half of the planchette writing sect has been destroyed by it. Of the 2 unpolished jade tier cultivators in the planchette writing sect, one is dead while the other is wounded. The great demon was also severely wounded, and it attempted to flee toward the West Sea. Fortunately, it was blocked by the sect master of Peace and Tranquility Mountain. However, more than half of the demons who were suppressed in the Well of Peace and Tranquility Mountain for thousands of years surprisingly escaped at that exact moment. The entire central region of Parasol Leaf Continent is embroiled in chaos right now. Zhongkue asked solemnly, "Teacher, what should I do?" The man chuckled coldly. "Certainly not drink wine to wash away your sorrows this late into the night." Zhongkue lowered his head and said, "I understand my mistake." The man in Confucian robes sighed. "Set off for Peace and Tranquility Mountain before morning arrives. When you get there, you and all of the disciples from the academy need to heed the instructions of the Taoist priests from Peace and Tranquility Mountain. You're not allowed to use your position in the academy to act as you please. Do you understand?" He wanted to say something else, yet he couldn't help but hesitate. His teacher shook his head and added, "Only cultivators at the upper 5 tiers have the right to hunt down that great demon." Zhongkue remained silent. In the end, his teacher said, "Zhongkue, you need to act carefully. Anyone might die due to this calamity, and even I'm not an exception." Zhongkue nodded in response. However, he suddenly recalled something at this moment, and he asked, "Fox Town?" The Confucian sage hesitated for a moment before replying, "You can put this matter aside first." There was a complicated expression in Zhongkue's eyes. However, the Confucian sage's Tao manifestation had already vanished from Green Roving residence. Chen Ping'an was transfixed with shock as he stood near the door. The planchette writing sect in Peace and Tranquility Mountain. Both of these were sects in Parasol Leaf Continent that Chen Ping'an was coincidentally familiar with. This was especially the case since that celestial maiden from the Lotus Flower Blessed Land's Mirror Heart Hall was actually Huang Ting, a Taoist nun from Peace and Tranquility Mountain. The most unfathomable thing was that the great demon had actually caused the immortal couple from planchette writing sect to suffer such a tragic fate, with one dead and one wounded. Zhong Kuei stood up and looked at Chen Ping'an. What's wrong? Chen Ping'an asked. I have an unreasonable request for you. Zhong Kuei replied with a bitter smile. Chen Ping'an immediately understood Zhong Kuei's intention, and he asked, You want the wind and snow all? However, he immediately shook his head in response. There was a dejected expression on Zhong Kuei's face, but he knew that this was only reasonable. Chen Ping'an smiled and said, I can't give it to you, but I can lend it to you. Really? Zhong Kuei asked in surprise. You need to consider this carefully. The struggle against the demons will be incredibly dangerous, so much so that even my teacher is at risk of dying, to say nothing of me. Aren't you afraid that your wind and snow all might be destroyed in battle if you give it to me? Aren't you afraid that I won't repay the debt even if I don't die? Chen Ping'an blinked and raised 4 fingers. Zhong Kuei laughed and said, I understand, ask my own conscience. Chen Ping'an suddenly thought of something and he asked, Do you want my physical body to come to Green Roving Residence? Traveling 150 kilometers along Burial River will take me quite a while. How about you directly go to the relay station by the river to retrieve the wind and snow all? Zhong Kuei pondered for a moment before replying, You can ask the water goddess to bring your physical body over. It will be very quick. I'm saying this because there are a few things that I need to do in Green Roving Residence, and it won't be suitable to do these things in front of outsiders. Zhong Kuei walked over to the table as he spoke, and he tapped the table with his fingers and continued, Miss Water Goddess, are you still pretending to be asleep? The Water Goddess smiled and sat up, leaving the table before replying, I'll head over to bring his physical body over straight away. Can I ask young master's physical body to jump into Burial River after I count to 10? While she counted, the Water Goddess dashed over to Burial River near her Green Roving Residence to fish Chen Ping'an from the water. This was her unique mystical power as the deity of the river. When she counted to 10, Chen Ping'an smacked his forehead in helplessness. A short moment later, the Water Goddess brought Chen Ping'an's physical body to Green Roving Residence. In addition to him, however, there was also a skinny little girl soaking wet. Zhong Kuei laughed heartily upon seeing this. How should my Yin soul return? Chen Ping'an asked. Zhong Kuei flicked his sleeve, summoning a gust of gentle wind that lightly pushed Chen Ping'an's Yin soul back into his body. You shouldn't allow your Yin soul to carelessly wander around at night unless you possess a Yang soul to protect it, Zhong Kuei warned. Chen Ping'an exhaled a long breath before retrieving the wind and snow all from his pocket treasure and handing it to Zhong Kuei. Zhong Kuei accepted the wind and snow all and asked, How should I return it to you in the future? Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, You can send it to Chen Ping'an from Dragon Spring Prefecture's downtrodden mountain in eastern treasured Vile Continent's Greatly Empire. Zhong Kuei nodded in acknowledgement, yet his expression became stranger and stranger. In the end he couldn't help but ask, Wait, you're actually acquainted with Mr. Qi from Mountain Cliff Academy then? I know quite a few things about Jewel's small world. Chen Ping'an didn't nod or shake his head. The Water Goddess hurriedly drank some wine to suppress her astonishment. Only then did she ask in a careful voice, Then are you familiar with Mr. Qi's teacher? Chen Ping'an scratched his head and grabbed his sword nurturing gourd to drink some wine. It was that very old scholar who had taught him how to drink, wasn't it? Back then, the young boy carried a drunk old scholar on his back, and the old scholar furiously slapped his head and exclaimed, Failing to be unrestrained is failing to make the most of your youth. You definitely have to drink. Pei Qian said she wanted to go over to the entrance of the hall to look at that spirit wall. The incense smoke wafting over the illustration of the temple was legitimately fragrant, and the water flowing in the illustration of Burial River genuinely made a gushing sound. This was truly very interesting. The Water Goddess waved her hand, summoning a young maidservant over, and asking her to bring Pei Qian to the spirit wall to enjoy the scenery. Upon remembering that the Confucian sage of another scholarly lineage had just left, Chen Ping'an put his wine gourd down and said, My hometown is the Dragon Spring Prefecture, and it used to be part of Jewel's small world. Mr. Qi was a teacher at a private school, but I never attended this school because I was too poor when I was little. However, my neighbor was able to afford it, so he was one of Mr. Qi's students. Even so, I did indeed come across Mr. Qi a few times. The small town wasn't very big after all. Zhong Kuei returned to the table and sat down, smiling widely as he poured himself a bowl of wine. He naturally didn't believe all of Qian Ping'an's words. He was a very young pure martial artist, yet he possessed a sword-nurturing gourd and 2 bonded flying swords. Not only that, but he could even release his own soul to travel around during the night. Even if Jewel's small world had been filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons, allowing Qian Ping'an to obtain these fated opportunities from other sources, Zhong Kuei refused to believe that Qian Ping'an had only come across Mr. Qi a few times. However, Zhong Kuei didn't dwell on this topic, since Qian Ping'an was clearly holding back. Even though the scholarly sage's works and philosophies were banned in the 72 Confucian academies, it wouldn't be surprising if the scripture libraries in the mortal world still privately owned a few of his works. This wasn't a big deal. To say nothing of being acquainted with Qi Jingchun, it wouldn't matter even if Qian Ping'an had been a student in that private school in Jewel's small world. He definitely wouldn't face any dangers or trouble if he wasn't Qi Jingchun's direct disciple, inheriting the scholarly lineage of the scholarly sage. Even taking 10,000 steps back and assuming that Qian Ping'an was in fact the direct disciple of Mr. Qi, this still didn't matter. In the jurisdiction of Great Subduing Academy in Parasol Leaf Continent, there was still Zhong Kuei and his teacher. However, things would become more unclear in the northern and southern regions of Parasol Leaf Continent, where the 2 other Confucian academies existed. Qian Ping'an could only go against his conscience and reply, "I've never come across the scholarly sage before." There was disappointment and pity in the water goddess' eyes. The disappointment was for herself, while the sense of pity was for Qian Ping'an. She dejectedly sat down and unrestrainedly gulped down a large bowl of wine. After wiping her mouth clean, she said with emotion, "What a huge pity that you've never come across such a lofty scholar before. You need to fight for the opportunity to meet him in the future, or else your life won't be complete." "All right, I'll fight for the opportunity," Qian Ping'an replied with a helpless smile. The water goddess suddenly recalled something and she asked, "Then have you come across someone called Cui Chan?" He was the first disciple of the scholarly sage, yet he turned out to be a complete bastard who betrayed his teacher. There's also that divinely skilled sword immortal, and his name is also incredibly domineering, Zui Yu. It's said that his sword skills are unparalleled in the world. There are also people like Mao Xiaodong. The scholarly sage has many disciples, so you must have come across at least one of them, right? Qian Ping'an raised his wine gourd and lamented, "Ah, such a disappointment, such a huge disappointment. Let's drink to alleviate this disappointment." The water goddess smacked the table, expressing deep irritation at Qian Ping'an's lack of reaction. "You still want to drink? What's wrong with you?" "If I had grown up in Jewel's small world, then the first thing I would have done after leaving is to pay a visit to the scholarly sage. If I couldn't barge into that Confucian school's forest of virtue, then I would have taken the next best option and gone to at least scold Cui Chan. I would also visit Zui Yu to witness his peerless sword skills, and I would visit Mao Xiaodong to play Go with him." "Yes, indeed, that sounds very reasonable," Qian Ping'an concurred. Zhong Kuei suppressed his laughter and said in amusement, "Scold Cui Chan? I'm not trying to belittle you, Miss Water Goddess, but the imperial preceptor of the Great Li Empire can shatter your godly body with 2 fingers even though his cultivation base has fallen a significant amount. He can hear me even if I scold him from outside the city gates of the capital of the Great Li Empire," the water goddess retorted with confidence. Zhong Kuei rolled his eyes and replied, "I guess he can't hear you then." The 3 of them each drank on their own. The atmosphere became increasingly heavy and solemn. The great demon hiding near Planchette Writing Sect had launched a vicious attack on the sect after being exposed, and even the unpolished Jade Tier couple extremely skilled at offensive techniques had been unable to stop it, with 1 killed and 1 wounded. Moreover, the battle had taken place inside Planchette Writing Sect, so in order to achieve this feat, the great demon's cultivation base had to be at least at the 12th tier, regardless of what advantage it possessed thanks to its innately powerful physique. This immortal tier great demon should have been extremely famous throughout the entire world. Yet it had actually remained silent and hidden in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent for countless years, and neither Planchette Writing Sect nor the Confucian Academy had detected its presence. Not only that, but the prison suppressing many demons and fiends in Peace and Tranquility Mountain had coincidentally unlocked when the sect master had rushed over to stop the great demon from entering the sea, allowing these demons and fiends to flee into the surroundings? In addition to this, rare ancient treasures and celestial tools had appeared one after another in Southern World Continent, Parasol Leaf Continent, and Circling Ascension Continent not long before this, causing countless cultivators to fight and kill each other for the treasures. Dare I ask, is your teacher, the Mountain Master of Great Subduing Academy, genuinely not afraid of being killed after leaving the academy to go to the front lines and hunt that great demon? The water goddess asked in a cautious voice. Zhong Kuei chuckled in slight anger and replied, "Can you have a little more confidence in my teacher? In any case, everyone else in the world has the right to ask this question but not you. Just how many times have you left Green Roving Residence and the Water God Temple to fight with that great demon during the past 200 or so years?" The water goddess drank some wine and replied, "That's not the same thing at all. I'm only a measly water goddess, while your teacher hails from the sagely residence of a sage, who's worshipped in the Confucian temple." Zhong Kuei shot a sideways glance at the water goddess and asked, "Are these the principles that you've learned from the scholarly sage's books?" The water goddess' embarrassment immediately transformed into anger. Scolding her and calling her unknowledgeable to her face was fine, but dragging the scholarly sage into this as well? This was completely unacceptable. She smacked the table and stood up, exclaiming, "Zhong Kuei, if you continue to make unpleasant remarks, then I'll have to make you vomit up the stir-fried eel noodles and the 100-year-old wine." Zhong Kuei took a swig of wine and retorted, "But I insist on drinking your wine." He drank another mouthful and continued, "And I drank some more again. It's truly delicious." The water goddess' expression was livid, and her entire body was shaking in fury. "There's an archway in my hometown and the words 'doing my part' are written on one of the 4 plaques," Chen Ping'an said softly. This is probably the reason why Zhong Kuei's teacher has made such a decision. Zhong Kuei already explained why Majestic World is willing to abide by the rules established by the Confucian sect. Regardless of whether Zhong Kuei's teacher survives or dies due to today's decision, the 3 of us, well, let's ignore Zhong Kuei, who's his disciple, and just focus on you and me, Miss Water Goddess. We'll feel like Great Subduing Academy's character and attitude are truly worthy of admiration. If I have children in the future, then I'll definitely tell them to visit Parasol Leaf Continent's Great Subduing Academy when they grow older and decide to travel around the world. Zhong Kuei nodded and raised his wine bowl, offering a toast to Chen Ping'an. The water goddess also nodded in understanding, approving Chen Ping'an's explanation. Thus, she also raised her wine bowl to offer a toast to Chen Ping'an. However, all feasts had to come to an end. Zhong Kuei put his wine bowl down and prepared to do one final thing before leaving Green Roving Residence. Pei Qian ran over to the entrance of the hall, holding her hands up as if she were cupping water. It looked like she was offering a treasure to Chen Ping'an, and appeared delighted as she shouted, "I scooped up a handful of water from the spirit wall. Do you want to take a look?" She lowered her elbows, revealing a handful of jade-like water in her cupped hands. Chen Ping'an took a glance at it before instructing her, "Pour it back into the spirit wall." Pei Qian nodded in understanding and giddily ran back to the spirit wall. Meanwhile, the maidservant covered her mouth and giggled as she ran after the skinny little girl. The water goddess felt like Pei Qian was quite lively and interesting, so she smiled and said, "It's only a handful of water essence from Burial River, only worth a measly few immortal coins. Young master, you didn't need to ask her to return it." Chen Ping'an shook his head in response. However, he didn't offer any further explanation. Zhong Kuei also had a pocket treasure with him, a small and exquisite bronze paperweight in the shape of the divine beast Xieji. 1. He picked up the wind and snow all, and he also took out 3 pieces of golden talisman paper, on which there was a vaguely visible seal script pattern. Chen Ping'an didn't recognize the value of this talisman paper, and he simply felt like it was slightly different from the golden talisman paper that he owned. However, the water goddess was familiar with them, and she exclaimed in astonishment, "Wind and thunder talisman paper? One has dragonclaw seal script, one has jade tendon seal script, and one has Ganoderma seal script. These are incredibly valuable. The imperial court of the Great Quan Empire only bestowed me with a single piece of dragon claw seal script wind and thunder talisman paper when I first constructed and opened my Green Roving Residence." Seeing Chen Ping'an's calm and composed expression, which betrayed his ignorance toward the precious nature of this talisman paper, The water goddess explained. Talismans created using such talisman paper are the best at petrifying ghosts, and even lofty earth immortals at the golden core tier or nascent tier are extremely fond of them. But they are incredibly expensive, so cultivators under the golden core tier would most likely have to exhaust all of their wealth if they want to purchase 3 pieces of wind and thunder talisman paper. In reality, Qian Pingyan had an inkling about this. When he cleaved through the enemy formation alongside Sword Saint Song Yushao in Watercombing Nation, a guest elder from the imperial court used one such golden talisman and summoned a warrior in golden armor, relying on it to block Qian Pingyan's advance. Qian Pingyan had clearly seen the pitiful and pained expression on the guest elder's face as he used the talisman. Even Peace and Tranquility Mountain isn't peaceful and tranquil anymore. So one can imagine just how chaotic the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent is right now, Zhong Kuei said. It's quite foolish to travel around without a few powerful talismans. Zhong Kuei placed the 3 pieces of talisman paper on the table. He held the wind and snow all in his hand, and before drawing the talismans, he said in a quiet voice, Qian Pingyan, being friends with each other is one thing, but it's still necessary to remain fair when performing transactions. I'm going to draw 3 weapon talismans for you, representing heaven, earth and humans, and with extremely strong killing intent. They're perfect for suppressing evil and killing ghosts. I invented these talismans myself, and even one will be enough to deter ghosts and spirits at the golden core tier. If you seize the perfect opportunity, then using all 3 talismans together might even allow you to severely wound a ghost king at the nascent tier. Anyhow, this is just some interest for borrowing the wind and snow all from you. Qian Pingyan patted Zhong Kuei's shoulder and chuckled. Since you're giving me such precious talismans, I'll also be generous and lend the wind and snow all to you for a few more days. Zhong Kuei shrugged and shook Qian Pingyan's hand away, rolling his eyes. Don't act like we're best buddies. The water goddess was astounded upon seeing this. She genuinely didn't understand the relationship between the young boy and the noble scholar. The former was willing to lend a high-grade immortal treasure, while the latter was willing to give away 3 pieces of wind and thunder talisman paper. Similar to his attitude in the Border Inn, Zhong Kuei started to act theatrically again. He held the brush high in the air as he prepared to write, and he flicked the sleeve of his other hand before also raising it high into the air and announcing. The sages once said, after reading countless scrolls and books, one can write as if they're assisted by the gods. Miss Water Goddess, bring me some wine. The water goddess handed him a bowl of wine. Don't get carried away, Qian Pingyan warned. Draw the talismans properly, or else I'll make you take out another wind and thunder talisman paper to redraw the talisman if the first one doesn't work out. You just said it yourself. Being friends with each other is one thing, but it's still necessary to remain fair when performing transactions. Zhong Kuei huffed and put down the bowl of wine that he had planned to drink to raise his spirits. I'm messing around with you, Qian Pingyan said. A sulky expression appeared on Zhong Kuei's face. The water goddess couldn't help but feel a slight sense of admiration toward the young boy, whose soul had wandered down Burial River earlier in the night. Are you truly not going to take a noble scholar seriously? Zhong Kuei took a large swig of wine before unleashing a satisfying burp. However, what happened next was truly mystical. Wisps of snow-white spiritual energy danced through the air, as if Zhong Kuei had exhaled some of the righteous aura that he had nurtured from reading sagely classics. The wisps of righteous aura gathered around the tip of the wind and snow all. Moreover, Zhong Kuei's manner of drawing talismans didn't adhere to proper techniques either. His brush didn't make contact with the talisman paper, and he instead recited a line from some poem. Holding a military seal and farewelling the imperial palace, the courageous heavy cavalry encircles their enemy. 2. Afterward he gently flicked his wrist and threw a large group of rice-sized miniature people from the tip of the brush. Looking carefully, one would discover that these miniature people were actually warriors clad in armor and riding war horses. The 100 or so mounted troops rapidly galloped across the wind and thunder talisman paper as they set up a formation, pulling back the reins and instructing their horses to stop when they arrived in position. Holding the wing and snow all in his right hand, Zhong Kuei held the index finger and middle finger of his left hand together before pointing at the talisman paper and commanding in a solemn voice, "Freeze!" The mounted troops in silver armor vanished in an instant, fusing into the golden wind and thunder talisman paper. The talisman paper instantly transformed into a finished talisman. Afterward, Zhong Kuei created the 2 other talismans in much the same way. It could be said that he had spirits and deities under his wrist. The water goddess sighed in admiration. This was as expected of a quasi-sage from Great Subduing Academy. Disregarding his knowledge and essays, just his skill in creating talismans alone was perhaps enough to make an unpolished jade-tier talisman cultivator smack the table and shout in praise. Zhong Kuei handed the 3 talismans to Qian Ping'an and said, "Done. Here are your 3 talismans." Qian Ping'an carefully accepted the talismans and asked with a smile, "Are you tired after drawing the 3 talismans?" Zhong Kuei patted his belly and sniggered. "This is nothing. My belly is full of strategies, and it's hiding 100,000 armored warriors. Drawing 3 talismans is nothing." Nothing. Zhong Kuei was completely dumbstruck at this moment. This was because he saw Qian Ping'an retrieve another 3 pieces of talisman paper after putting away the 3 golden talismans. These pieces of talisman paper were also golden, but the faint patterns on them weren't the seal script patterns of the wind and thunder talisman paper. Instead, the patterns on them appeared even more ancient. Qian Ping'an gently placed the 3 pieces of talisman paper on the table and said with a wide smile, "Since you're not tired, then why don't you help me draw 3 more talismans? It would be best if you could draw a lightning element talisman, a guidance talisman that can shatter those illusions in the mountains and rivers, and a binding talisman that can restrict the bonded flying swords of sword cultivators, like the dry well talisman." The water goddess was extremely puzzled. This young master from another nation was truly very rich. Zhong Kuei wiped the sweat from his forehead and bemoaned, so be it, I'll be generous until the very end. 3 more talismans, was it? I'll draw them for you." After pondering for a moment, Zhong Kuei made up his mind and said in a solemn voice, "I'll draw a 5 lightning talisman for you, the type that the heavenly masters from Mount Longhu are extremely skilled at. Lightning techniques are paragon among the myriad techniques, and Mount Longhu enjoys a position of orthodoxy among the various broad and shallow schools of lightning techniques. My teacher visited Mount Longhu several times during his travels, and he met the great heavenly master one time and was fortunate enough to learn a 5 lightning talisman, 5 dragons holding jewels. This talisman contains thunder and lightning, and its aura is so powerful that it soars through the sky." However, he quickly noticed the strange expression in Qian Ping'an's eyes. "Hey, come on. Can't you let me rest for a moment first?" Zhong Kuei asked in a pitiful voice. "I'm completely beat after drawing 3 high-grade talismans in a single go. How was I supposed to know you'd take out another 3 pieces of high-grade talisman paper? I would have piped down a little if I had known this earlier." Qian Ping'an smiled and sat down. "Take your time, have some wine and relax. I won't pester you." Zhong Kuei breathed a sigh of relief. He drank a large mouthful of wine before grabbing the golden talisman paper on top and neatly placing it on the table. There was rumbling thunder and flashing lightning on the tip of the wind and snow all as it hovered a foot above the talisman paper, and the arcs of purple and white lightning radiated with a vast heavenly might as they lit up a small area in the air. The water goddess was extremely startled by this. After drawing the 5 dragons holding jewels talisman that contained astonishing might, Zhong Kuei continued by drawing a guidance talisman as per Qian Ping'an's request. Qian Ping'an nodded in understanding, and he reached over to grab the final piece of talisman paper. He smiled and said, "All right, I won't frighten you anymore. The previous 2 talismans were already enough." There was a serious expression on Zhong Kuei's face as he grabbed Qian Ping'an's arm, the one in which the young boy was holding the azure talisman paper with 2 fingers. "I definitely have to draw this talisman. However, I need to prepare for a while so I can draw the talisman carefully. Otherwise, if I stuff up, I'll scold myself even if you don't rush over to pummel me. Can you succeed?" Qian Ping'an asked. "Why can't I succeed?"
Zhong Kuei retorted.
"Of course I can succeed. However, it will be an absolute waste of this precious talisman paper if I draw an ordinary dry well talisman that can only restrict the bonded flying swords of cultivators under the nascent tier." "Zhong Kuei, you're far better at drawing talismans than me," Qian Ping'an praised. "You're a pure martial artist, so do you think I should be happy that I'm better at drawing talismans than you?" Zhong Kuei asked in slight exasperation. Qian Ping'an was rendered speechless. After remaining silent for a moment, He decided that he wouldn't disturb Zhong Kuei's rest anymore. He allowed the noble scholar to nurture the aura of righteousness in his body. However, he also made a decision in his mind. Zhong Kuei took a deep breath before turning to the water goddess and saying, "Tell all of the spirits and ghosts to leave Green Roving Residence. You can allow them to return after I finish drawing this talisman." Even though the water goddess wasn't sure why Zhong Kuei was requesting this, she still used her position as the deity of Burial River, and her unique mystical power as the owner of Green Roving Residence to instantly expel all of her stewards and maidservants from the residence. Zhong Kuei stood with one hand behind his back and one hand holding the wind and snow all. Gusts of righteous wind swirled in his sleeves. Green Roving Residence suddenly started to tremble violently in the next moment, with the underground water veins becoming turbulent and chaotic. The water goddess immediately felt difficulty breathing, so she stepped back in retreat and tried to get as far away from Great Subduing Academy's noble scholar Zhong Kuei as possible. However, she still felt extremely uncomfortable, so she eventually decided to leave the hall altogether. Only then did she feel slightly better. She bit her lips and appeared dazed. Zhong Kuei was definitely more than just a noble scholar. While Zhong Kuei drew the talisman, he also recited, "Flicking the sleeve and raising the sword, making the rivers clear and shattering the mountains, the seas of the 9 continents do churn in turbulence." When talismans were created, the talismanic core would usually be concealed within the talisman. Now, however, it surprisingly materialized in midair, assuming the form of a sword immortal in white as tall as a finger. The mini-sword immortal hovered above the talisman and thrust its sword forward in a lively manner, causing sword chi to furiously surge forth. Zhong Kuei was slightly pale as he put the wind and snow all away. He drank a large mouthful of wine, and there was a wide smile on his face even though he was completely exhausted. "This talisman can also be regarded as one that I invented. It's my proudest creation, and I've named it the Sword Suppressing Talisman. Using the boundless sword intent of an ancient sword immortal, this talisman can suppress the bonded flying swords of all cultivators under the upper 5 tiers. This talisman paper is far too high quality, and the talisman that I drew is also quite impressive. Unlike the Drywell talisman or whatever, my sword-suppressing talisman can directly capture the bonded flying sword of a golden core tier cultivator. Of course, it won't be able to trap a nascent tier cultivator's bonded flying sword for too long, and it's only a matter of time before their flying sword manages to break free. However, you need to keep one thing in mind. Don't carelessly take out this talisman and allow outsiders to see it. My teacher once warned me that this sword-suppressing talisman doesn't abide by the rules because it targets sword cultivators too harshly. Because of this, revealing its existence might cause you a lot of trouble. Thank you for your hard work," Chen Ping'an said with a slightly guilty expression. Zhong Kuei shook his hand and spoke to Chen Ping'an using his mind's voice, saying, "This talisman paper is the manuscript paper that sages use to write down their fundamental knowledge. Do you know how rare and precious it is? Even my teacher only possessed a mere 3 pieces of this azure talisman paper when he left Middle-earth Divine Continent. He used one when crossing the seas, and he used another one upon arriving in Parasol Leaf Continent, so he only has one left right now. My teacher treats his azure talisman paper like his dear child. In fact, even I'm not allowed to touch it. I'm only allowed to look at it." In other words, the might of the sword-suppressing talisman would have been far inferior if it were drawn on a piece of golden talisman paper. Such a sword-suppressing talisman would have only been able to capture the bonded flying sword of a golden core tier sword cultivator. Moreover, it would have only been able to capture it for 15 minutes at most. Zhong Kuei exclaimed in delight and started to drink again. Chen Ping'an flicked his wrist and silently handed Zhong Kuei a piece of talisman paper. Zhong Kuei's eyes were wide with shock as he exclaimed, "Have you gone crazy? So be it if you didn't understand the value of this talisman paper. Yet, you're still treating it so carelessly after I explained its value to you? Hurry up and take it back." However, Chen Ping'an didn't say anything as he directly let go of the azure talisman paper, allowing it to drift to the floor. Zhong Kuei had no option but to hurriedly catch it and quickly put it into his sleeve. Chen Ping'an grabbed his sword-nurturing gourd and raised it into the air, chuckling softly and saying, "I wish you success in your trip to Peace and Tranquility Mountain to slay demons and eliminate fiends." Zhong Kuei wanted to say something, but he couldn't help but hesitate. In the end, he remained silent as he raised his wine bowl and lightly clinked it together with Qian Pingan's sword-nurturing gourd. They both drank a large mouthful of wine. After finishing the beautiful wine in his bowl, Zhong Kuei stood up and said, "I'm leaving now." Qian Pingan cupped his fists in farewell. Zhong Kuei was just about to leave. However, Qian Pingan said in reminder, "You're not going to ask Miss Water Goddess for a pot of wine?" Zhong Kuei's eyes lit up, and he raised a thumb at Qian Pingan. The Water Goddess was a straightforward and generous person to begin with, so she naturally wouldn't be stingy about something. She brought 2 pots of wine over, yet Zhong Kuei gave one of them to Qian Pingan instead. Qian Pingan didn't refuse Zhong Kuei's act of goodwill, especially since he had already finished the green plum wine from the border inn. He slowly poured Green Roving Residence's 100-year-old wine into his sword-nurturing gourd. Holding the pot of wine in his hand, Zhong Kuei disappeared in a flash, soaring through the air and arriving on the banks of Burial River. He was just about to cross the river, yet he suddenly ground to a halt. As it turned out, he had seen his teacher's Sol standing there and seemingly waiting for him. Zhong Kuei hurriedly hid the pot of wine behind his back. The mountain master of Great Subduing Academy was a middle-aged man with little emotion on his face, and Zhong Kuei obediently followed behind him as he slowly walked along the bank of Burial River. There were 72 mountain masters corresponding to the 72 Confucian academies in Majestic World, but their cultivation bases varied a lot. The most powerful mountain masters could be transcendent individuals at the immortal tier. Yet there was no lack of mountain masters only at the nascent tier either. For example, Mao Xiaodong from Great Sui Nation's newly founded Mountain Cliff Academy was only at the nascent tier. However, nascent tier mountain masters had the power of unpolished jade tier cultivators when they fought in the territory of their Confucian academies. Because of this, no one dared to underestimate their cultivation base. The mountain master of Great Subduing Academy had come from the residence of a sage who was worshipped in the Confucian temple, and his cultivation base could be regarded as middling among the 72 mountain masters. He was at the unpolished jade tier, and he could reach the immortal tier if he were to fight in Great Subduing Academy. However, he was heading to the West Sea located to the west of the Planchette Riding Sect to hunt that great demon this time, so he would remain at the unpolished jade tier since he had left the territory of his Confucian Academy. Our opponent most likely has a trump card, so I'm not asking you to shrink back and refuse to advance, but I'm hoping that you can plan before you act, the mountain master said in a quiet voice. You shouldn't become careless, even if you're only subduing the demons wreaking havoc around Peace and Tranquility Mountain. I understand, Zhong Kuei replied with a nod. The mountain master of Great Subduing Academy stopped and extended a hand, atop which a piece of azure talisman paper was hovering. Here, take it. Use it to protect yourself. Zhong Kuei didn't reach over to accept it, and he instead revealed, Teacher, you didn't use your mystical powers to observe the situation inside Green Roving Residence when you were standing by the river just then? You recklessly summoned an errand ghost from the netherworld when standing near the bank of Burial River before. So taking into account my responsibility as the mountain master of Great Subduing Academy, how could I not use my mystical powers to observe the situation? Zhong Kuei's teacher scolded. However, you were simply interacting with friends in Green Roving Residence, so I naturally didn't invade your personal privacies to observe the situation. If it weren't for the fact that it would be careless to hand you this talisman paper in front of outsiders, my soul would have already left this place long ago. Zhong Kuei smiled and replied, Teacher is truly noble and unsullied, and your moral integrity is even higher than mountains and longer than rivers. I'll remember this valuable lesson. The mountain master paid no heed to this and he asked, Why aren't you accepting the talisman paper? Zhong Kuei could only tell the truth and reply, Apart from the calligraphy brush that has a strong affinity with me, my friend also gifted me an azure talisman paper. The mountain master frowned and put his azure talisman paper away, appearing a little displeased as he asked, Why did you calmly accept such a valuable gift? Zhong Kuei was rendered slightly speechless, and he carefully mulled over this for a moment before replying, I don't know why, but it felt like the correct choice to accept it. Please punish me, teacher. The mountain master also fell silent for a short moment before saying, You don't need to hide that pot of fine wine from Green Roving Residence. Since you've made a good friend, is this not a cause for a drink to celebrate? However, keep in mind that drinking is okay, but you can't let it delay your trip to Peace and Tranquility Mountain. Also, don't let this happen again. Zhong Kuei scratched his head in puzzlement. His teacher wasn't possessed, was he? His teacher was famous for being stubborn and pedantic, and he would always follow the rules and abide by etiquette no matter the situation. He was also extremely good friends with that mountain master from Complete Reed Continent who would either remain calm and uninvolved, or become incredibly ferocious and destructive once he made a move. With a snap of his fingers, the wandering Yin soul of the mountain master instantly returned to his physical body located extremely far away. The mountain master felt a slight sense of melancholy. Looking at his disciple interact with that young boy, he was involuntarily reminded of his own youth. Back then, he had mingled with many descendants of scholars who had lived in the sagely residences, and he had also mingled with many descendants from wealthy clans and powerful sections. Most of them had been around the same age as him, and many of them had felt a sense of jealousy, whether strong or slight, toward that person with the surname Qi. This was because they admired that person who called himself Aoyang the most. However, Aoyang loved to tell others that little Qi was his friend, so if anyone dared to bully little Qi, he would pummel them until even their ancestors started to roll in their graves. In Green Roving Residence, the water goddess' first remark after Zhong Kuei left was truly quite astonishing. I know that you've met the scholarly sage before. Moreover, it definitely wasn't a fleeting moment where you simply walked past each other in a chance encounter. Chen Ping'an was unfazed and he replied, "How come I'm unaware of this myself?" The water goddess snickered and said, "You're still trying to lie? Zhong Kuei might not recognize your status and see through your knowledge, but that's because he doesn't belong to the scholarly sage's scholarly lineage. He doesn't belong to the scholarly lineage of Mountain Cliff Academy's Qi Jingchun. But who am I? I'm someone who has read all of the scholarly sage's works without skipping over a single word. I've read the scholarly sage's works countless times. Moreover, I'm well aware of just how divinely impressive the scholarly sage was when he attended the debate between the three teachings those 2 times. One who is filled with knowledge naturally behaves with elegance. One's aura of righteousness will naturally manifest differently depending on what books one reads. And just who am I? I'm the water goddess of Burial River, after all, and observing the auras of other people is my strong suit." Looking at the supremely confident water goddess, Chen Ping'an smiled and asked, "So what?" The water goddess' air of confidence instantly fell apart, making her appear completely deflated as she asked, "You've genuinely never met the scholarly sage before?" "I've met him before," Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. The water goddess rested her arms and head on the table, with a deep sense of grief lingering in her eyes. However, she suddenly leaped up and exclaimed, "What? You've met him before?" Chen Ping'an raised a finger to his lips, gesturing for the water goddess to speak quietly. The water goddess dazedly stared at the young boy, who had indeed met the scholarly sage before. Holy moly! How can there be such a handsome little brother in the world? Perhaps I should get him drunk and become sworn brothers with him? That way, won't I also have a modicum of connection with the scholarly sage? She wiped her mouth and started to stupidly chuckle to herself, thinking that her schemes were indeed unparalleled in their effectiveness. This was as expected of someone who had read the works of the scholarly sage countless times. She hadn't read those sagely books in vain, and definitely wouldn't embarrass the scholarly sage. Chen Ping'an was starting to regret the fact that he had revealed his acquaintance with the scholarly sage. Milling people during the first watch of the night, flickering flames on the second, wandering ghosts on the third, and sneaking thieves on the fourth. Roosters call on the fifth, and a new day begins. 1. It was midnight, and Burial River was thick with Yin energy, perhaps due to the killing intent radiating from the cavalrymen of the Yao clan and their weapons. This menacing Yin energy was blocked from entering the relay station, as if there was an invisible wall holding it back. Yao Jinji was in her room, practicing a divination technique commonly known as the Fire Pearl Forest technique. This was a secret technique from the mountains, yet it couldn't be regarded as a legitimate or orthodox technique. Yao Jinji had coincidentally learned this technique from a scripture library during her childhood, and she had simply treated it as a pastime for the past few years. She could either toss 3 copper coins onto the floor to answer a single question, or she could place 6 copper coins into a bamboo tube before tossing them out and observing which side they landed on to predict one's future and estimate one's luck. However, this was hit and miss, so even Yao Jinji didn't believe the results too much. Tonight, she performed divination with 3 copper coins to determine whether her trip to the capital of the Great Quan Empire would be a smooth sailing one. The result was great fortune. She then used 6 copper coins to predict the fortune of the Great Quan Empire's Imperial Lu clan. Afterward, Yao Jinji was perplexed as she looked at the copper coins one by one. She couldn't make sense of the results no matter how she racked her brain. In the end, she could only chuckle in self-ridicule and remark that it was innately wrong to ask these questions to ghosts and deities instead of the common people. Yao Jinji didn't dwell on the results of the 2 divinations anymore, and stood up and walked to the window, where she saw Yao Lingji practicing saber techniques outside. Further into the distance, she could still see candlelight illuminating that room. There was no need to guess. She knew that it was Yao Xianji burning the midnight oil to study military texts. As a young woman, she had naturally detected the emotions hidden deep inside Xiao Yuanran's eyes. However, she was purposely pretending that she didn't understand his feelings, even though she had clearly seen through them. She had only spoken a few words to that young Taoist priest during their trip, and she had also gazed at the back of his figure on purpose one time. In fact, it was quite hilarious that the young guest elder thought that his fake expression of calm and indifference could hide his emotions and fool her. Yao Jinji was clearly aware that her inadvertent gaze had caused the heart of that wildly ambitious Taoist priest to flutter. Yao Jinji firmly believed that the reaction of one's heart was far more credible than one's explanation of a myriad of words. In any case, saying more words didn't result in being more believable. Whether one listened was one matter, and whether one sincerely accepted the words was another matter altogether. Beautiful women and influential men both possessed innate advantages. Yao Jinji couldn't help but feel a little dispirited when she thought about this. Why was that person able to remain truly calm and composed when he interacted with her? From evening until the next morning, Zhu Lian continued to walk up and down the bank of Burial River, waiting for Chan Ping'an and Pei Qian to return. All kinds of strange things had happened last night, and it had all started with the little girl, Pei Qian, spewing nonsense and claiming that there was a golden bridge above the river. Afterward, Chan Ping'an had stopped practicing standing meditation and asked him to return to the relay station with Pei Qian. Later at night, Chan Ping'an had suddenly dived into the river, and Pei Qian had surprisingly followed after him without any hesitation at all. A whirlpool had mysteriously appeared in the river, and it had been accompanied by a wave of abundant spiritual energy, causing Zhu Lian to feel a little uncomfortable. In any case, the whirlpool had enveloped Chan Ping'an and Pei Qian before vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Zhu Lian had only seen the hazy figure of a short woman. During his time in this world, he had heard the others say that Parasol Leaf Continent was only one of 9 continents in Majestic World. Heaven and earth were boundlessly large. Cultivators and immortals were profoundly powerful. In the beginning, there had been a slight sense of despondence in Zhu Lian's mind. It was as if he were the wealthiest noble of a county city, who had suddenly traveled to the capital and discovered that he couldn't afford anything at all. Thus, it was inevitable that he would feel disappointed and downcast. However, Zhu Lian had quickly and comprehensively gotten over this. Instead of despondence, what he now felt was a surging sense of fighting spirit and ambition. Even though Zhu Lian was always smiling as he followed Chan Ping'an around and served him, this martial arts prodigy wasn't delaying his cultivation for even a second. The 3 other people from the picture scrolls were no inferior to Zhu Lian. Wei Xian was carefully examining this world, observing heaven and earth from the finest of details. Sui Yubian was cultivating in seclusion and comprehending sword techniques inside her carriage, while Lu Baixiang further displayed his many talents, showing that he was masterful in all of music, Go, calligraphy, and painting. This was the intangible yet distinct advantage of Zhu Lian, Lu Baixiang, Sui Yubian, and Wei Xian. Each of them had been the most powerful person in the Lotus Flower-blessed land at one point in time. As pure martial artists, their minds' realms were also close to flawless, living up to the notion of pure. However, there was also secret competition between the 4 people. They were all striving to become the first person to advance to the 7th tier. Once they advanced to the 7th tier, the Vajrabhati tier, then the 8th and 9th would no longer be a big challenge for them. It would only be a matter of time before they advanced to these tiers. Julien glanced up at the sky, and returned the same way that he had come. He held a pebble in his hand and gently rubbed it with his fingers, and fine dust from the pebble was quickly scattered away by the refreshing breeze brushing past the river. Apart from their martial arts cultivation bottlenecks, the 4 people were naturally displeased about the shackles placed on them as well. After all, Wei Xian was the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation, Liu Baixiang was the founding ancestor of the demonic forces, and Sui Yubian was a sword immortal who had desired to shatter the rules and regulations of the lotus flower-blessed land with a single slash. That being the case, could the 4 people truly admire and be loyal to the young boy who possessed the 4 picture scrolls? Could they truly be willing to serve him? To say nothing of Chan Ping'an, even the little girl called Pei Qian most likely wouldn't believe this. However, the 4 people all had a deep impression of Chan Ping'an thanks to the battle at the border inn. Julien tightened his grip on the pebble and murmured to himself, judging by Chan Ping'an's current attitude, Liu Baixiang is most likely the person who revealed the truth first. Perhaps it's because of this that the relationship between them is so close and relaxed. After drawing the sword-suppressing talisman which possessed an astonishing talismanic core, Zhong Kuei had quickly left the burial river along with his teacher. The fortunes of mountains and rivers gradually stabilized in Green Roving Residence, and the young maidservant also returned to the large hall with Pei Qian. Just then, Pei Qian had run outside the hall and tossed the handful of Burial River's water essence back into the spirit wall. However, the wafting incense smoke on the spirit wall had instantly become disorderly and chaotic, and the gushing water in the river had started to churn in a tumultuous manner as well. It was as if the river were about to burst out from the wall and flood the entire Green Roving Residence. Pei Qian was given a huge fright, and she had exclaimed that she wanted to return to Chan Ping'an's side. However, including the young maidservant, a water ghost who had died an unjust death in Burial River many years ago, all of the spirits and ghosts had been expelled from Green Roving Residence when the water goddess had channeled her mystical power. Left all alone in front of the spirit wall, Pei Qian had immediately burst into tears, bawling loudly until her voice became hoarse. Walking back to the hall now, there were still tear stains on Pei Qian's little face. She timidly stood at the door, not daring to enter the hall. She possessed some level of observation skills, and she knew that Chan Ping'an was discussing proper matters with the water goddess. What would happen if she barged in and angered Chan Ping'an again? Zhong Kuei had helped her out last time, but who would step forward and help her out this time? "What's wrong?" asked Chan Ping'an, turning around. Pei Qian quickly ran into the hall and sat down on the chair next to Chan Ping'an. She sat up straight and there was a hint of grievance and guilt in her voice as she explained, "I returned the handful of water to the spirit wall just then, but for some reason the entire spirit wall started to shake. Chan Ping'an, I genuinely didn't do that on purpose. You're not allowed to get angry at me." Chan Ping'an lightly flicked Pei Qian's forehead and chuckled. "Oh? Even you can become afraid." Pei Qian immediately felt at ease upon seeing this. By the looks of it, that frightening commotion most likely had nothing to do with her. Feeling much more confident, she immediately sat up straight, drooling a little as she smelled the fragrance of the wine. Pei Qian had seen many strange creatures, spirits and ghosts now, and she also remembered the supernatural stories that the storyteller under the bridge in the lotus flower-blessed land had told. The storyteller had always mentioned how drinking a single glass of wine, or eating a single peach from the underwater dragon palaces or immortal abodes could allow one to increase one's lifespan. Thus, Pei Qian asked in an uncertain voice, "Can I take a small sip of wine?" Chan Ping'an shot a glare at her, and Pei Qian immediately feigned an expression of realization, remarking, "I'm still little, so of course I can't drink." "Chan Ping'an, how about you drink a bit more?" The water goddess was extremely amused by the mischievous little girl, and she laughed heartily as she said, "I have quite a lot of 100-year-old blooming water wine in Green Roving Residence, so I'll give you another pot in a while. As for whether Chan Ping'an snatches it away to drink by himself or whether he leaves a few drops for you, that's not something I can control." Pei Qian was fearless whenever she was with Chan Ping'an, so she feigned a demeanor of maturity as she replied, "I'll still say thank you if you truly give me a pot of wine, but I'm still little, so I'm not allowed to drink yet. Otherwise it will affect my reading and learning." However, please don't be stingy the next time we visit if I'm old enough to drink at that time, or else that will bring embarrassment to your status as a god." The water goddess clicked her tongue in wonder as she examined Pei Qian's appearance. She became increasingly interested in the little girl, and she was half serious as she said to Chan Ping'an, "She's so lively and full of spiritual energy, so why don't you let her stay in Green Roving Residence? I'll help you look after her. And I'll also let her inherit my position of water goddess of Burial River in the future. I promise that I'll teach her everything I know. And I'll even refine 2 immortal treasures for her. That way, she can become the most powerful water god in the Great Quan Empire in at most 200 years. Pei Qian hurriedly stood up in panic and fumed. "Please don't utter such nonsense. I still need to go to Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Dragon Spring Prefecture to help put up spring couplets on my old home." Chan Ping'an politely declined the water goddess' offer. He would definitely feel worried if he didn't bring Pei Qian with him. The water goddess didn't insist on this. However, she genuinely hadn't been joking with her offer. She had immediately taken a fancy to Pei Qian's aptitude, so if the little girl had truly ended up staying in Green Roving Residence, then she would have genuinely given it her all to raise Pei Qian as the next water goddess. Not only that, but she would have also crafted 2 immortal treasures for her. 2 weapons specifically. In fact, the water goddess would have even gone as far as to yield to the Great Quan Empire and Great Subduing Academy's demands in order to elevate her Green Roving Residence to Green Roving Palace. At that time, she could charge over to slay the great demon who had been causing trouble in Burial River for more than 200 years. Even if she died with the great demon, this would still be a huge act of virtue that benefited the 900,000 people who lived on the banks of Burial River. She could live up to the sagely principles that she had learned from the scholarly sages' books. In terms of why she, a water goddess, had taken a fancy to Pei Qian at first glance, this was even more interesting and nuanced. Having been the deity of this river for many years, the water goddess of Burial River was also someone with extremely good fortune. Otherwise, she wouldn't have comprehended the immortal mantra that was the cornerstone of that upper 5-tier cultivator's great Tao simply by observing that unvisited and unremarkable stone tablet. Just then, she had carefully channeled her divine Qi observing technique to observe Pei Qian, and she was completely shocked by what she had seen. The water goddess could already be regarded as outstanding among those who were fortunate enough to possess golden physiques. Yet the skinny and tanned little girl standing in front of her was surprisingly even more outstanding. Pei Qian possessed a top-notch golden physique that had an incredible affinity with becoming a deity. To put things simply, it would be an enormous waste of Pei Qian's golden physique if she didn't become a mountain goddess or a river goddess who enjoyed offerings of incense. Even sages would sigh in grief. The so-called golden physique was a bit similar to the concepts of innate sword talents for sword cultivators and innate bodhisattvas for Buddhists. People with such physiques and innate affinities would be uniquely blessed, allowing them to advance in leaps and bounds along a certain great Tao. Those who possess golden physiques would often be short and skinny, yet their bones would be extremely tough and sturdy. There was a physiognomy technique that allowed the user to assess the strength and mass of someone's bones. Among the myriad physiques in the world, the golden physique would cause one to develop some of the heaviest bones. Apart from having some of the heaviest bones, those with a golden physique would also possess a strong temperament, be prone to impatience, and display resoluteness when killing enemies. The last part was especially so because the metal element of the 5 elements represented coldness and killing intent. As a result, those who possessed a golden physique would also have innate might and dignity, so they were the perfect choices for official positions and military positions. However, even though the water goddess' judgment was already very astute, it was still not quite good enough. The extraordinary nature of Pei Qian's physique and talent had already surpassed the level of the 5 elements. Because of this, Zhu Lian also felt like Pei Qian was a martial arts prodigy when he looked at the little girl. In fact, while purchasing those ancient copper coins before, even Yao Jinji had pondered for a moment and felt like Pei Qian was perhaps a divination prodigy. The little girl could most likely achieve double the results with half the effort if she studied divination with her. Only noble scholar Zhong Kue was able to see a more complete and in-depth picture. However, it was a pity that Pei Qian had come across Chan Ping'an, a young boy who didn't explain any principles to her. In terms of martial arts or qi refinement, Pei Qian didn't even need to dream about these things. The mischievous little girl was traversing mountains and crossing rivers with Qian Ping'an now, and she would already be ecstatic as long as she could slap that extremely valuable talisman on her forehead, the talisman that was worth as much as a large residence. With that talisman on her forehead, even walking for a long distance wouldn't make her tired anymore. There was always one matter to subdue another matter. The relationship between Qian Ping'an and Pei Qian was perhaps a good example of this principle. Regardless of whether Pei Qian studied martial arts with Zhu Lian or remained in green roving residence to become the next water goddess of Burial River, it would be nothing more than a dream to hope that she would feel gratitude toward Zhu Lian or the water goddess, regardless of how powerful she became thanks to their tutelage. In fact, Pei Qian might even smack them to death if they had a serious disagreement one day. Not only that, but she would even feel that her actions were justified. If they provoked her, then would it be wrong to kill them on the spot if she were more powerful than them? What else was she supposed to do? Leave them alive to be an eyesore? It was only when she was with Qian Ping'an that her mindset was completely different. However, Qian Ping'an was the exception rather than the norm. Even though this was the case, neither Qian Ping'an nor Pei Qian were aware of this peculiar relationship between them. The water goddess waved her hand, after which the young maidservant quietly retreated and took her leave. Only then did the water goddess say, "Qian Ping'an, I'm a straightforward person and I know you are as well. Otherwise, Zhong Kuei wouldn't have become so close and friendly with you. That being the case, I'll speak my mind frankly." Qian Ping'an nodded and replied, "Please go ahead, Miss Water Goddess." The water goddess's expression became solemn, and it was as if she were carefully choosing her words to discuss something extremely important. Qian Ping'an wasn't sure what the water goddess wanted to discuss. Theoretically speaking, Zhong Kuei had already resolved the matter regarding her rejection of Great Subduing Academy's offer, so green roving residents shouldn't be facing any challenges at this moment. However, since the water goddess appeared so serious, Qian Ping'an quietly sat there and waited for her to speak. "Qian Ping'an, you've met the scholarly sage before, so can you tell me if the scholarly sage is like a towering mountain that one has to behold in awe? Does he speak with eloquence, with every word and every sentence inspiring utmost admiration?" Upon hearing the scholarly sage explain the paramount and profound principles of the great Tao in the simplest terms possible, will one feel a strong urge to prostrate themselves and loudly kowtow in respect. The water goddess's eyes were glowing with spirit and exuberance as she sat opposite Qian Ping'an and spoke. Fortunately, Qian Ping'an wasn't drinking at this moment, or else he would have immediately spat his wine out. Pei Qian didn't know who the scholarly sage that the water goddess spoke of was, but judging by the water goddess questions, it seemed like Qian Ping'an was acquainted with a fairly impressive old man. Pei Qian couldn't help but feel a sense of shared pride. She proudly crossed her arms in front of her chest. How could the scholarly sage not appear approachable? Not only was he short, but he also acted like an impoverished scholar as he traveled around the world. In fact, it would be more accurate to describe him as unremarkable rather than approachable. Truth be told, the scholarly sage had appeared even more impoverished and disheveled than Zhong Kuei while the latter was at the border inn. The old scholar liked to drink other people's wine. He liked to feign drunkenness and refused to pay after drinking, and he also behaved quite poorly after becoming drunk. However, Qian Ping'an couldn't bring himself to say these things to the water goddess. He was afraid that the water goddess Dao heart would truly shatter if she heard these things. The water goddess didn't use her large white bowl to drink this time, and she instead decided to directly grab the wine gourd. She drank a large mouthful of wine and remarked, "The scholarly sage is just as I imagined. He's like the heavens above. His knowledge is supreme, yet he still feels compassion for the world and the common people. He remains polite and amiable as he travels around the world, and he treats everyone with kindness." Yet, the scholarly sage was only placed in the 4th position in that Confucian temple in Middle-earth divine continent back then. He wasn't allowed to enjoy an equal standing with the paramount sage? How preposterous! The water goddess continued to ramble on, speaking out against the injustices suffered by the scholarly sage, someone whom she admired immensely. Qian Ping'an didn't interrupt. However, he recalled many genuine scholars as well as people who yearned to become scholars. There was Mr. Qi's teacher, Mr. Qi Zhongqiu from the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, who was very similar to Mr. Qi Qian Ping'an himself, and that little boy called Chao Qinglang from the lotus flower-blessed land who was very similar to himself. There were all kinds of reasonable and unreasonable matters in the world, yet one would eventually end up in one place. Home is where the heart is. Chen Ping'an didn't say anything, and he simply continued to drink. This delicious wine reminded him of many beautiful people and things. There was the scholarly sage's theory of sequential order, Mr. Qi not being disappointed, Zhong Qiu having a clear conscience, and Chao Qinglang's sense of hope. Chen Ping'an definitely wouldn't become a pathetic alcoholic today. Instead, just like Aoyang had mentioned, he might truly become a wine immortal. One spoke by herself and one daydreamed by himself. They were both drinking, and there was no need for others to encourage them to drink. The so-called cellar that Green Roving Residence's blooming water wine was aged in was actually the water essence of Burial River. After aging for 100 years, the blooming water wine would naturally become sweet and mellow. It was extremely easy to drink, yet the delayed effects of the alcohol would also be quite strong. The water goddess genuinely got drunk, with her head swaying back and forth as she sat cross-legged on her chair. She revealed that she was extremely jealous of Chen Ping'an because he had met the scholarly sage before, and was also so familiar with the old sage. His life was essentially complete. On the other hand, the water goddess felt like she was nowhere near as fortunate. She would sit upright on her divine altar every day, observing the incense smoke wafting through the water god temple. There were seemingly even more worshippers and incense offerings than Mirage City's scholarly temple and city god pavilion, yet the incense smoke was polluted with so much greed and selfish desires. She disliked many of the offerings, those that prayed for riches, those that prayed for children, those that prayed for power. The water goddess wanted to stand in front of the scholarly sage and ask him a question. The sages had already expounded so many principles, the Confucian temples were already worshipping so many lofty sages, and such an abundance of scholars who had read countless Confucian classics, so why was the world still so pathetic? Why did the world make her feel increasingly disappointed? Why was she disliking the mortal world more and more? After murmuring for a long time, the water goddess eventually started to count on her fingers, as she recited some iconic lines from the scholarly sage's works. She grumbled that there were so many brilliant theories and principles, yet the people in this world were somehow unwilling to learn any of them. Perhaps the scholarly sage's knowledge was too profound and lofty, so much so that the people in this world couldn't reach it at all? In the end, she was at a complete loss, and she scratched her head with both hands. Pei Qian rolled her eyes. Yeah, it was best that she didn't drink in the future. Otherwise, it would be far too comical if all women became as silly as this water goddess after drinking. Chen Ping'an possessed a very good quality when he drank wine. Namely, before becoming drunk and falling asleep, his eyes would always become brighter and brighter as he drank. He would be filled with renewed energy and vigor, and there would also be a sense of liveliness on his face. To make an analogy, it was as if his fist intent weren't concealed anymore, but was instead released. It was as if the sobering nature of his precociousness would be suppressed by the wine. However, this didn't imply that Chen Ping'an was genuinely becoming more and more awake as he drank. Rather, he was simply unable to suppress his innate personality after becoming drunk. Chen Ping'an was always very cautious and meticulous when he was sober, as if he were holding a fragile copper mirror or using his hands to guard a flickering candle in a bare room, yet unwilling to let others see these scenes. After becoming drunk, however, he would move his hands away from the candle and allow its radiance to shine free and uninhibited. So what if it illuminated the entire world? Chen Ping'an slammed his sword-nurturing gourd down on the table and asked loudly, "How is the scholarly sage's knowledge too lofty? How are his theories and principles not effective? They're as effective as can be. Let me say this to you. The scholarly sage's principles are universal and accurate no matter the time and the place. Kind-hearted people can learn them. Sinister people can learn them. Emperors and officials can learn them. Peddlers and servants can learn them. Immortals from the mountains can learn them. Demons and ghosts can learn them. And deities of mountains and rivers can also learn them. In terms of whether one is willing to put their learnings into practice, that's something to worry about after one has studied and understood the scholarly sage's principles. In any case, just learning these theories and principles is already a huge benefit in and of itself." Chen Ping'an subconsciously straightened his clothes and sat up straight, emulating noble scholar Zhong Kuei and emulating Mr. Qi from the private school. He then continued. After learning this genuine knowledge of the world, a spring will appear in one's heart and provide one with endless knowledge to better oneself. I feel like the old scholar's theory of sequential order is a grand theory that expounds true knowledge. It's a theory that everyone can learn. Do you want to learn it? The water goddess appeared slightly adrift and befuddled as she smacked the table and replied, I'll learn it if you teach it. Qian Ping'an leaned slightly forward, using his finger to write the characters sequential order on the table. The core principle of this theory can be described using two words, sequential order. This theory is very unique in Confucianism, and it exists outside the realm of etiquette and regulations. It's another grand theory that can benefit the world and the common people. My understanding of this theory is neither complete nor in-depth, so I'll only talk about the things I know and the principles I understand. I'll refrain from explaining what I don't know. Now, let me repeat to you what the old scholar told me that night. These are the tenets of the theory of sequential order. Bit by bit, Qian Ping'an carefully recounted the succinct introduction to the theory of sequential order that the scholarly sage had told him that night. Fortunately, Qian Ping'an's good memory wasn't affected by the effects of alcohol, allowing him to recount everything without mistake. Chapter 1. Understanding order. All matters in the world happen due to a sequence or many sequences of events. Not a single detail should be glossed over or ignored, and one should never cherry-pick these events to formulate one's own biased version of the story. Otherwise, the myriad matters in the world could never be made sense of, and one would never be able to assign right or wrong. What would happen if everyone in the world seemed pitiful yet detestable at the same time? How could one speak reason at that time? If reason couldn't be spoken, then perhaps one would have to rely on their fists to do the speaking? This was utterly absurd. Chapter 2. Reviewing magnitude. There was a notion of magnitude regarding how right or wrong a certain action was. Thus, it was necessary to borrow two scales, the laws proposed by legalists, and the calculation of foretellers. Chapter 3. Determining good and evil. With etiquette and regulations as a basis, and taking into account the varying customs and traditions of different areas, as well as their differing notions of morality, it would be determined whether a certain action should be rewarded or punished. This was a question to the people's conscience regarding whether a certain action was right or wrong. Chapter 4. Unity of knowledge and action. A person should correct their mistakes if they have made any, and they should guard against them if they have not. Carefully introducing and explaining the contents of these 4 chapters took Qian Ping'an 2 entire hours. The theory of sequential order is a profoundly good theory. However, to adhere to these principles and to abide by the tenets of this theory is unbelievably difficult. I didn't know why the scholarly sage persuaded me to drink back then, and I didn't know why Zhu Yu obliterated the divine statue of the rain god with a single slash either. Afterward, he didn't speak any reason at all before annihilating the entire flood dragon trench with another slash. I'm even more confused about why Zhong Kuei is clearly a noble scholar, yet he doesn't act like a noble scholar at all. And why did the old monk from the Heart Manifestation Temple say that this world has always been indebted to good people? When the old Taoist priest brought me on a journey through the lotus flower-blessed land, why was it the case that good people always suffer misfortune, yet bad people rarely ever receive punishment for their crimes? There were many times when Qian Ping'an tried to integrate real-life examples into his explanation of the theory of sequential order, yet he would often start to feel a sense of self-doubt as he delved deeper and deeper into the explanations. He told the extremely focused and attentive water goddess that the explanations he had come up with were still too shallow and limited, especially regarding the principles that pertain to the tangled webs of right and wrong and the nuances of the human mind. He was far from being qualified to draw any conclusions. Sitting opposite the water goddess, there were many times when Qian Ping'an murmured to himself. Another 2 hours passed, and time slowly flowed past them like the river water outside green roving residents. At some point in time, the water goddess had already stood up to listen in solemn respect, with her back slightly bent in a bow. She was like a student listening to the teachings of her teacher, memorizing every detail and not daring to let slip a single word. Pei Qian was seemingly listening, yet she was seemingly absent-minded at the same time. Her arms were sprawled across the table, And her cheek was also resting on the table as she looked at Chan Ping'an explaining so many grand principles to the water goddess in a single go. In her memory, Chan Ping'an had never been someone to speak a lot. Apart from his interactions with Chao Qinglang, he would rarely say many words even if he engaged in a life-and-death battle. This was the case during that battle in the street in the Lotus Flower-blessed land, and also the case during his battles with Imperial Preceptor Zhongqiu, Old Demon Ding, and the others. After leaving the Lotus Flower-blessed land, he had killed that azure buffalo with a single slash near Jin Huang's residence on the border of northern Jin Nation. In the border inn, he had said, "Ask your own conscience," from the second floor before killing that haughty little duke with 3 punches. Chan Ping'an said that he didn't understand many things. In reality, Pei Qian didn't understand them either. The skinny little girl was even more confused than Chan Ping'an. Why was Chan Ping'an so polite and willing to speak reason to everyone in the whole wide world? Yet he was only mean and unwilling to speak reason to her. Yet for some reason Pei Qian didn't feel upset when staying by his side, even if he would sometimes scold her and punish her for her mistakes. Pei Qian felt at ease when she stayed with Chan Ping'an, and felt like she could simply do what he asked her to do. This was seemingly justified, and she wouldn't need to think about anything else. Of course, she would still feel very annoyed at some of the more troublesome tasks. Even so, these emotions were already much better than before. Before meeting Chan Ping'an, she had been like a lone ghost wandering around the capital of Southern Garden Nation, completely without aim as she floated around the place. She had always felt like she would eventually freeze to death or starve to death one day. Perhaps one of the reasons Pei Qian felt the way she did toward Chan Ping'an was due to the qualities that he was displaying tonight. He was explaining the principles that believed and approved of the most, yet he still conceded that his explanations and reasons might not be the most correct and reasonable. Chan Ping'an would always see the good in other people. Meanwhile, Pei Qian was only willing to see the bad in other people. Outside Green Roving Residence, the 3 golden characters on the plaque shone with a dazzling golden radiance. Inside the residence, the water ghosts were astonished and elated to discover that faint threads of golden light were flowing through the entire residence like water. Not far from Green Roving Residence, the surface of Burial River shimmered under the soft moonlight, appearing especially bright and clear. Many water ghosts filled with resentment and sinister tendencies after dying unjust deaths involuntarily left the gloomy depths of Burial River and swam toward the surface. Upon arriving at their destination, they bathed under the moonlight before dissipating into the air. It was as if they were finally given relief from their sorrowful existences. Outside the water god temple near the bank of Burial River, loud commotion suddenly swept through the crowd of worshippers waiting to enter the temple the next morning to offer incense. As it turned out, they could vaguely see the gold statue of the water goddess suddenly stand up and grow in size, measuring more than 30 meters in height as she peered down at the mortal world. Her statue was made from clay and gilded in gold. Yet the description of gold statue couldn't be more apt at this moment. The water goddess gold statue radiated with not only dignity and might, but also a sense of majestic divinity. In the depths of Burial River, the great demon that was only a small step away from advancing to the golden courtier was hiding in its lair at the bottom of the river. It should have felt extremely comfortable and relaxed in its lair, yet it suddenly felt as if it had been tossed into a wok filled with boiling oil. This was a torturous experience. Left with no other option, the great demon could only charge out from its lair and unleash deafening bellows, causing gigantic waves to sweep across the surface of Burial River. It furiously swam upstream, yearning to escape the excruciating pain that was coursing through its body. The great demon didn't forget to wreak havoc as it swam, yet each time it attempted to leap ashore to unleash its fury, it would be pushed back by the banks of the river that suddenly seemed like the walls of a prison cell. It was forced to chaotically thrash about in the depths of Burial River, unable to leap ashore to harm the residents along the banks. The first rays of sunshine gently peeked over the horizon. The sleeves of the water goddess billowed in the air as she stood inside Green Roving Residence, with golden light flowing over her entire body and especially her heart. A golden core spun around on the spot, illuminating the entire hall and completely covering the radiance offered by the large candles. The book said, "To hear and grasp Tao in the morning, one may die in the evening with no regrets." 1. The water goddess had never imagined that she would enjoy such immense fortune. to hear the great Tao at night, and to form a golden core in the morning. The water goddess bowed deeply, filled with heartfelt gratitude toward the young boy sitting in front of her. Her face was filled with tears of joy as she asked, "Young scholar Chan, since you are the scholarly sage's direct disciple, why did you lie to me earlier?" 1. This is a saying by Confucius recorded in the Analects of Confucius. It means that if one hears and grasps Tao in the morning and acts upon this understanding, then one will be left with no regrets even if they die in the evening. This represents a fervent pursuit of Tao. After the water goddess asked this question, she noticed that she didn't receive a response for a long time. She eventually looked up and didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. As it turned out, Chan Ping'an had already fallen asleep in a sitting position, snoring quietly as he slept. A smile spread across her face. Chan Ping'an's relaxed and carefree nature appeared slightly casual, yet in her eyes, he was no inferior to those impressive cultivators who were supremely deadly and unstoppable. After pondering for a moment, the water goddess of Burial River was just about to walk over and carry Chan Ping'an to a room in her residence so that he could have a good rest. However, Pei Qian hurriedly dashed over to Chan Ping'an's side as if she were facing a huge enemy. "What are you trying to do?" she asked. The water goddess rolled her eyes and replied, "Perhaps you want him to sleep here until morning? He at least needs a comfortable bed, does he not? Otherwise, just what kind of hospitality is my green roving residence showing?" "Oh, then make sure to be careful. Don't wake my dad up," Pei Qian warned. While saying this, Pei Qian carefully grabbed the sword nurturing gourd and tied it back to Chan Ping'an's waist. If this wine gourd was lost, then she would probably be scolded to death by Chan Ping'an even if she wasn't beaten to death. This was inevitable. After all, she was the most worthless thing in Chan Ping'an's mind. Reunions and partings caused by fate, and the coming and going of fate. These were some of the most mysterious things in the world. The events of last night and this morning were a perfect example of this. This was Chan Ping'an's first visit to Green Roving Residence. Yet who would have imagined that he would bestow such a huge fated opportunity to the water goddess? One needed to understand that gods and deities were essentially limited to the slow accumulation of incense offerings to advance their cultivation. As a result, it was far more difficult for them to improve their cultivation compared to qi refiners and pure martial artists. Apart from being appointed by the imperial court or receiving an imperial edict from the emperor, allowing a deity to advance using the fortunes of an entire nation, gods and deities could only advance their cultivation little by accumulating the essence of the incense offerings from their worshippers. The water goddess gently picked Chan Ping'an up and placed him on her back. This young boy was the best-behaved drunk in the world, and he wasn't too heavy either. The water goddess didn't use any mystical powers such as land-shortening techniques to directly arrive inside a courtyard in a single step, and she instead walked one step at a time with Chan Ping'an on her back. This was an incredibly rare display of patience for the often patient water goddess of Burial River. The water goddess was extremely curious. How was such a young boy able to house so many grand principles inside his head? Why was he viewed as a successor by the scholarly sage and Qi Jingchun? He would have been very young back then, no? If Chan Ping'an had truly listened to Tao and learned these principles from a very young age, then just how impressive was his background? Just how impressive was his talent? Perhaps he was the reincarnation of a god, allowing him to be born with immense knowledge? On second thought, however, the water goddess immediately felt like she was incorrect. After all, the scholarly sage would have come across all kinds of talented prodigies before, so he most likely wouldn't be as shallow as her. While walking beside the water goddess, Pei Qian kept her head raised to observe the deity's expression. Upon seeing the slightly strange smile on the water goddess' face, the skinny little girl finally couldn't help but ask, "You're not attracted to my dad, are you?" The water goddess shook her head and replied in a gentle voice, "No, I neither like him nor do I think I'm worthy of him. If I had to choose a scholar in the world to become my husband, I would probably be more attracted to that disheveled noble scholar from before. Marrying and living with a man like that would probably be easier. On the other hand, things would be more difficult with young Master Chan." Pei Qian would have become angry if the water goddess had replied that she liked Chan Ping'an. However, she became even angrier when she heard the water goddess reveal that she didn't like Chan Ping'an. "Are you blind?" the little girl instinctively exclaimed. The The water goddess turned around to glance at the fuming little girl, and she chuckled. Oh? Perhaps all of the women in the world have to like Chan Ping'an to not be considered blind. Pei Qian humped coldly in reply. Her expression was haughty, and it was as if she were saying, I'm not going to waste my breath on a foolish woman like you. The water goddess was already in a good mood to begin with, so she couldn't help but laugh out loud when she saw Pei Qian's expression. Pei Qian felt like she was being belittled, so she became even angrier as she fumed. What are you laughing at? My dad is your benefactor, and I'm his daughter, so that makes me your young benefactor. Show some respect. The water goddess slowed down a little and asked in a quiet voice, Should I offer you a thank you gift? Pei Qian's eyes lit up, yet they quickly became dim again. She appeared slightly listless as she replied, Forget about it, you can directly offer the gift to Chan Ping'an. I don't dare to carelessly accept any gift. Otherwise, he'll definitely scold me for lacking manners again when he wakes up. My kindness will be regarded as bad manners, so why should I trouble myself with this? Don't you agree? The water goddess was extremely amused, and it took her a lot of willpower to finally suppress her smile. She put on a serious expression and explained, It's okay, I'll naturally prepare a more valuable thank you gift for Chan Ping'an. Since you're Chan Ping'an's daughter, however, it only makes sense for me to give you something in our first meeting since I'm somewhat of a senior. It won't be too unreasonable for you to hide this present from Chan Ping'an either. After all, this isn't a significant matter with big implications. It's not like you'll use this item to do bad things either, so Chan Ping'an will only scold you at most if he finds out about this in the future. This won't hurt at all, so what are you afraid of? Pei Qian was slightly swayed by the water goddess' words, yet she quickly sniggered and replied, How do you know I won't do bad things? I'm a very bad person. If I receive a super powerful immortal treasure or learn some incredibly powerful immortal technique, then I'll immediately kill whomever I don't like. Even Chan Ping'an won't be able to stop me. However, I'll definitely look after Chan Ping'an's face if I become stronger than him in the future. I'll only kill when I'm by myself. I'll be even more ruthless and resolute than that big old baddie with the surname Zhu, and that stern-faced woman with the name Yubian. I'll kill people just as easily as I eat, just like how I get Chan Ping'an to refill my bowl of rice in the blink of an eye. The little girl became happier and happier as she spoke. Meanwhile, the water goddess became increasingly shocked as she listened. Only at this moment did she realize what a crazy person Chan Ping'an was bringing around with him. Pei Qian was comparing killing people to eating rice, and she wasn't just pretending to be scary like ordinary and naive little children. No, she was being honest. The look in the water goddess' eyes changed as she started to carefully observe Pei Qian again. Pei Qian suddenly flared up in rage and exclaimed, You're such an evil person, Miss Water Goddess. You're repaying kindness with evil intentions. Are you purposely trying to screw me over? You want me to make a huge mistake in front of Chan Ping'an so he abandons me, aren't you? That way, you can seize the opportunity to act like a kind person and take me in, forcing me to become a little maidservant who serves you in green roving residence, right? The water goddess remained silent as she carried the sleeping Chan Ping'an and looked down to observe the tan little girl. She purposely caused her eyes to become ice cold, pretending to conceal this yet also allowing it to slip through at the same time. She smiled and asked, Is that how you view me? Sure enough, Pei Qian immediately retreated a single step and pretended to be relaxed as she smiled and replied, I'm just joking with you, Miss Water Goddess. The water goddess nodded in understanding. This little girl who possessed a golden physique was definitely no simple person. Moreover, it would practically be impossible to control her nature. The water goddess involuntarily recalled the situation last night when Pei Qian had run over with water cupped in her hands. Chan Ping'an had only given a simple instruction, yet Pei Qian had immediately run back to the spirit wall to return the water. Not only that, but everything had seemed normal and in line with her nature. She hadn't appeared rebellious in the least. The water goddess finally understood some things as she ruminated on this. She couldn't help but praise the young boy on her back. Pei Qian chuckled in amusement and remarked, You were trying to scare me just then. The water goddess felt slightly helpless. Did this little girl truly possess the keen instinct to see through the fluctuating thoughts of other people? Just how tiring would it be to interact with her day after day? The water goddess carried Chan Ping'an to one of the most refined courtyards in Green Roving Residence, and all of the courtyard doors and building doors automatically opened to let them inside. After the water goddess placed Chan Ping'an on a bed with extravagant blankets, Pei Qian hollered for her to move aside. The skinny little girl then walked over to help Chan Ping'an take his shoes off and tuck him into bed. Only then did she sit down on the edge of the bed and stare at the water goddess. The water goddess smiled and said, "You have your own place to sleep. I'll bring you over straight away." Pei Qian furiously shook her head, saying, "I need to guard the night for my dad. I need to protect him from bad people." "All right, there's no need to flatter him anymore. Chan Ping'an is genuinely asleep now," the water goddess said in a joking voice. Pei Qian was slightly skeptical, and she glanced back at Chan Ping'an before standing up and saying with a grin, "Then I'll head off for some shut-eye. I'm completely beat. However, you definitely have to remember to immediately come over to inform me when my dad wakes up. We're in a hurry to continue our journey. We promised to meet up with the group today, and my dad is someone who always keeps his promises." The water goddess had no option but to surrender to this unbelievably mischievous little girl. After leading Pei Qian out of Chan Ping'an's room, she asked in curiosity, "The group? What's going on?" Pei Qian hesitated for a moment before roughly explaining the situation with the Yao clan's convoy. The water goddess nodded and replied, "No problem, the two of you can sleep in peace for 4 hours, and I'll bring you upstream of Burial River when you wake up just like last night." Pei Qian finally felt at ease, and she followed the short but incredibly rich water goddess to a nearby courtyard. She was extremely picky, and there was also an expression of disdain on her face. In reality, however, she was feeling as envious as could be. She thought to herself that she definitely needed to buy a residence as large and extravagant as this when she had enough silver in the future. Not only that, but she would even use gold and silver to pave the floor and slap yellow paper talismans all over the insides of the buildings. After bringing Chan Ping'an and the mischievous little girl to their rooms, the water goddess arrived outside Green Roving Residence in a single step. She was in a trance as she looked up at the plaque. She took another step, instantly arriving inside the water god temple where her gold statue was worshipped. There were roughly 15 minutes until the temple opened to the worshippers outside when she walked inside the main hall. A peculiar phenomenon of heaven and earth had appeared from her temple when she had formed her golden core just then, causing the hundreds of worshippers waiting outside to fall to their knees and pray in utmost sincerity. The water goddess had sensed their sincerity all the way from Green Roving Residence in the distance, and this had allowed her to obtain slight enlightenment regarding incense offerings and the Tao of gods and deities. The golden clay statue on the altar inside the main hall had already returned to normal, no longer glowing with divine light that illuminated Burial River. In reality, the statue barely resembled the water goddess. The clay statue was tall and slender, with its sleeves also appearing lively as if they were billowing in the wind. It was as if the statue were a goddess wearing a divine dress and standing in the breeze. The water goddess had always felt like the gold statue didn't represent her at all. It was far too beautified, but this was due to the rules dictating how the statues of mountain gods and river gods should be made.